introduction. Also, welcome our newest member of the commission, Carl McPherson. So let's start with Carl. Why don't you, really excited to have you on board. Welcome. Carl's the Executive Director of Metropolitan Public Defenders, and welcome.
Thank you. No, I greatly appreciate it. I greatly appreciate the opportunity to serve our state and to be a representative on behalf of public defense. I've been a public defender for over 20 years, practicing in Washington, D.C., the great state of Michigan and Oregon. So I'm very privileged and happy to be here. Thank you.
My name is Jessica Beach, and not only am I on the commission, but as a representative of our Oregon Association of Community Corrections Directors.
Jeff Oxier. I was the elected district attorney in Columbia County for the last 6 years. Recently returned in a managing position in the county DA's office, the senior deputy there. And I've been on the commission for, I've lost track, three years.
And again, Paul Solomon, chair, recently appointed chair of the commission. I've been on the commission for pushing 2 years now, a year and a half. I am the former executive director at Sponsors Reentry Program, but have served on many different public bodies related to public safety, and am a person with lived experience in our legal system. Vice Chair.
Sorry,
Just doing quick intros.
Rob Ovet, Vice Chair of the Criminal Justice Commission. I've been on the CJC for 8 or 9 years now. We'll term out in another year and a half. Been involved with CJC since the 90s. I work on diversion programs pretty much in the system to get people out of the system who are suffering from substance use disorders or behavioral health issues. I work for Washington County. I'm aware of them. My primary things are land use, IT, and community corrections. It's me.
Good afternoon, I'm Tim Freeman. I'm the Douglas County Commissioner. I've been on this commission for around a year. In Douglas County as commissioners, we are also the county administrators, so a lot of administrative work. Work very closely with our sheriff, DA, as elected officials alongside those elected officials. Was a state legislator for quite a few years. I've been doing public policy now for a little more than 20 years.
Great. And I believe we have a couple of individuals signed up for public comment today. Is Kiki Parker Rose with us? Former CJC commissioner. Kiki, are you, I see your initials up there. Are you with us?
I'm with you. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah.
Commissioner,
Yes.
Can you hear me? Okay, great. Thank you for the opportunity to appear before you today. I have a brief amount of information I'd like to provide. I think I was told I could have 3 to 5 minutes. I think I'll take all of that if that's appropriate. If not, Chair Solomon, please let me know and I will cut it short. So good afternoon, Chair Solomon and members of the commission. My name is Kiki Parker Rose and I'm the Community Justice Director in Jackson County, and I come before you today as the chair of the Local Public Safety Coordinating Council. Jackson County has heavily supported the Justice Reinvestment Program since its inception. Jackson County has utilized JRP funds in a variety of ways in order to help reduce the number of people going to prison for drug driving and property offenses. Jackson County submitted an application for Justice Reinvestment Program funds and requested 2 years of funding to continue 5 of our existing programs and create a new program. We received notice from CJC that the Grant Review Committee has recommended a 1-year provisional funding for our county. Last week, we submitted an information packet to CJC and hope that you have each had an opportunity to review that packet. Our hope is to paint a picture for you of the importance of the impact of these funds, the impact of these funds have in our community and provide you with some data. JRP funds have provided over 12,000 client services and nearly 11,000 victim services in our community. Jackson County's supervised population has increased by 0.9% over the last 2 biennium, increasing the need for support and resources. Importantly, 604 people totaling 863 cases were diverted from prison between January 1st, 2018 and October 1st, 2023. During that time period, 129 people representing 198 cases that had previously been diverted from prison were revoked from probation and sentenced to prison. This provided an overall savings of 13,729 months of prison because it was diverted to community supervision. Jackson County accepted 199 short-term transitional leave cases, resulting in a minimum reduction of the length of stay by 556 months. The total months diverted or reduced in the last 5 years by Jackson County is at a minimum of 14,285 months. That's 442,835 days. The average daily cost of a prison bed in 21-23 was $140.87. There has been a positive return on investment specific to JRP funds in Jackson County. Jackson County has fully utilized the JRP funds. The programs and services provided have had a profound impact on many adults on supervision who were granted probation and remained in the community. Included in that packet that was sent to CJC last week, you will find 3 letters from individuals who benefited from JRP funding. These letters tell the individual story, which allows us to tell you our story. Several of the folks who benefited from services now walk alongside those who are currently on supervision, assisting them with navigating sobriety and providing support. We are able to fund peer mentors, in-house cognitive programming, which is known as the Transitional Care Program, and provide an employment program. According to the Oregon Justice Reinvestment Initiative Return on Investment Final Report, the second major factor that may cancel out or subdue the effects of JRI is jail capacity. And it further says it is clear how jail capacity can mediate the effects of JRR in jurisdictions that have forced release issues. 43.67% of jail intakes are forced or cap released in Jackson County. With this in mind, we identified a gap in our system and have asked to fund a new program that is specific to reentry from jail and coordinating care for this population. The program description is provided in the original grant application. Ultimately, this new program will help us begin those vital conversations with words like, how can we help you be successful upon your release, and creating a humanitarian relationship and building rapport with adults in custody. We have worked closely with our CCO, Health and Human Services, Public Safety Agencies, Victim Services, our Board of County Commissioners, the county and city administration, citizens in our community, service providers, educators, and many others to create a plan so that we can continue to utilize JRP funds within our community. Jackson County respectfully requests that you accept and approve our application for full biennial funding. Thank you for the opportunity to appear before you today.
Thank you for your comments. Next up.
Yeah, this is Pablo Nieves Valenzuela. I'm a government relations manager for Washington County. Thank you so much for the opportunity to testify today. I wanted to start by just saying how much we appreciate the Justice Reinvestment Advisory Committee, including recommendations to fund our BIPOC-specific programming and both options that will be presented to you today. That said, we do want to emphasize that the first option is strongly preferred. And the key difference is that the option 1 also includes needed funding for our 18 to 24 program, and it provides greater funding for our BIPOC specific programming. So the 18 to 24 caseload, during a recent review of preliminary data associated with the recalibration of the public safety checklist, we found that males on supervision age 18 to 24 years old are the demographic with the highest rates of reconviction, with a 65% recidivism rate during the first 3 years of supervision. So we realize we clearly have work to do in this area, and we believe our 18 to 24 program is designed to address that problem directly. For our BIPOC caseloads here in Washington County, nearly a third of our local supervision population falls into a BIPOC community. And so we recognize that there is an immediate need to provide culturally responsive supervision through our newly established Afrocentric caseload, as well as a proposed BIPOC caseload. So those programs would be supervised by staff members who are passionate about working with underserved communities of color, and would allow folks who identify as people of color to voluntarily opt into supervision on these specialized caseloads. Then we would provide for peer support services through culturally responsive organizations. So just to wrap it up, we strongly urge your support for the funding included in option one from the review committee's recommendations. We believe that by establishing programs with caseloads specific to clients who are young men or from BIPOC communities that are staffed by personnel who have the appropriate skills, that we can make meaningful progress in reducing disparate outcomes in Oregon's criminal justice system. So thank you again for the opportunity, and I'm happy to answer any questions, although I do have a very urgent meeting I have to jump to in just a couple minutes.
No problem. Thank you very much, Mr. Nieves Valenzuela. I think we will move on in the agenda, but we will certainly take your comments into consideration. Next up, we have the Justice Reinvestment Program award decisions that Ian's going to present.
Thank you, Chair Solomon. Members of the commission, good afternoon. My name is Ian Davidson. I am the Justice Reinvestment Program Manager. Here I'm joined by two of my colleagues who I'll ask them to introduce themselves as well.
Hello, my name is Catherine Talon. I am a Senior Research Analyst at the Criminal Justice Commission.
Hi, I'm Adeline Padlina. I'm a grant coordinator at the Criminal Justice Commission, and I predominantly worked on the victim services portion of this grant.
So as you will soon very see, the Justice Reinvestment Program, or what I might refer to as either JRI or JRP, has a lot of moving parts to it. And so you'll hear from us at different points in time throughout this presentation, but we're going to cover the main parts of the Justice Reinvestment Program, the formula grant, the competitive grant. We're going to touch on unallocated funding, and then we're also going to talk about the victim services portion of Justice Reinvestment. So before we from your grant review committee, I thought it might be helpful to do a little bit of background. For those of you who have been around quite a bit of time, this will be old, so please just bear with me. So House Bill 3194 in 2013 created the Justice Reinvestment Program. It was also known as the Justice Reinvestment Act. I'll just read a section from that bill. It says that the purpose of the program is to provide funding for counties to plan, implement, and expand initiatives that establish a process to assess individuals and provide a continuum of community-based sanctions, services, and programs designed to, number one, reduce recidivism while protecting public safety and holding individuals accountable, and then likewise, reduce prison usage while protecting public safety and holding individuals accountable. Now, Justice Reinvestment is a somewhat narrowly focused grant program where it is targeted for property, drug, and driving crimes. So it doesn't touch on person crimes or sex crimes. It's just property, drug, and driving crimes primarily. The Justice Reinvestment Program has seen an increase in funding over the last decade. And so for this current biennium, 2023 to 2025, we're looking at just shy of $46 million for what we call the formula grant. Now, the formula grant has a few moving pieces to it. 87% of that funding goes to counties directly, where they can spend it on all of those things that we just talked about, the services, the sanctions, treatment, housing, any number of things. 10% of that goes to community-based nonprofit victim service providers. And then 3% of the formula grant is used for evaluations. In the presentation from Lane County, they mentioned a couple times the different evaluations that have occurred in the past, the 416 program a few years ago, and then an ongoing one about the way home. And so those are two examples of 3% evaluations. Later on, research director officer will give a more in-depth presentation on what we are proposing for the 23-25 biennium. For the competitive grants, it's a little more than $8 million, with 10% of that going to victim services and then 90% of that going towards the county. However, unlike the formula grant, this is narrowly focused on downward departure programs. And we'll talk more about that in a moment. So the Justice Reinvestment Program has the timeline in which counties have time to work on and apply for their grants has significantly expanded. Previously, it was a very tight turnaround, basically a month and a half. Now the process actually starts at the end of March, and then it concludes, at least for the counties, at the end of August. So quite a bit more time where they have to review the questions, think through the questions, and we now use a two-tier or two-stage process where they submit the bulk of the application. The grant review committee actually sits down, convenes, reviews all of those applications, and then provides feedback back to the counties. The counties then take that feedback, incorporate that, and so then what is ultimately their final application is in the best position that it can be. That they actually receive feedback before funding is even, before a budget is even put together. And so we have begun engaging with counties to ask them how the application process has gone. Overwhelmingly, the response is, we love this elongated time period. It's given us more time. We're grateful for the feedback. Thank you for allowing us time to incorporate this feedback. So now I mentioned the JRP has a lot of different moving pieces. What that means, at least for me, is that I start diagramming. And so here is the grant decision-making process. So there are actually a few different review bodies that do the bulk of the review work. For demonstration purposes, here is all of the formula and competitive grants. And so the grant review committee, they receive these applications as soon as we do, CJC staff, and then they have about a month and a half to review these materials. And so the grant review committee, which is the box in the top left, they review all formula grant applications and all competitive grant applications. Now, there is a community-based victim service advisory panel. There are individuals who either actively work or have worked with victim services across the state, and they review a different stack of papers and make recommendations. And then last is the 3% evaluation staff committee. Research director officer will talk about that in more detail later. So for our purposes, what we will be presenting to you are the recommendations from the grant review committee, the community-based victim service advisory panel. And so for each of their recommendations, you have a few options. You can, as you can see in the top right box, you can approve the recommendations. And this is specific to the formula grant, the competitive grant, or the victim service portion. Or if you disagree with any part of their recommendation, you would send that portion back to the grant review committee for reconsideration. As staff, we would ask that you be very specific in what you disagree with them to help the grant review committee reconsider that application if you were to move down that path. So I'll pause here, and Chair Solomon, if you're all right with it all, I can take questions.
Yeah, great. Questions for you?
So when would be appropriate time to talk about the recommendations specific to the two counties in the 1 year? Is this the right time to talk about that, or?
We have information prepared for that, and so,
Thank
yeah.
you.
Right, so we will go through these one by one. So the first portion, we'll go over the formula grant, which is where we will talk about those two counties that are recommended for provisional funding. And then once that portion has concluded, we'll do a short presentation on some unallocated funding, and then we'll move on to competitive grant, and then lastly, the victim services portion. So for the formula grant, here, I guess, before we look at the particulars of it, this is your grant review committee. They're the individuals who have been either appointed by the governor or the Chief Justice of the Oregon Supreme Court to review all of these applications. And we're very lucky that they take this responsibility seriously. As you can see, they come from across the state and they work in different fields related to criminal justice. Many of them, I have not yet done this, but if you were to probably add up their years of experience, it would probably pass a century. And so they considered these applications carefully, and then they spent 6 hours in a room with us looking over and discussing these applications. So the recommendations that we are presenting to you today, they are their recommendations. And so we're happy to answer their questions. We will not always be able to present their intent perfectly because, you know, I'm always hesitant to speak for a group of 7 people, let alone 10 people. So for the impact of formula grant funding, as has been alluded to, there are 2 of the 33 counties that have applied that have been recommended to receive provisional funding. Now, provisional funding is, I think, a perhaps misunderstood recommendation. Provisional funding, what it functionally means is that they are awarded funds for 1 year. This does not at all touch on or consider second-year funding at this point in time. Second-year funding is contingent upon future approval. And so when we get to the particulars of the recommendation, you'll see that the Grant Review Committee has identified specific actions that they would like to see the counties take to receive second-year funding. So, however, I think probably the most significant thing that a provisional funding decision means is that CJC staff resources can be leveraged to assist those counties. So right now, with 33 counties applying for justice reinvestment funding, myself, the rest of the justice reinvestment team, we simply cannot afford, or we cannot give the kind of technical assistance that every one of these counties does. So it focuses our efforts on, in this case, potentially 2 counties for provisional funding. We've now gone through several biennia with provisional funding, and I'll just relay one example where a county that has received provisional funding in the past has now actually said publicly it was a good thing we were placed on provisional funding. Our application is stronger for it. Our program is stronger for it. And so I completely understand the anxiety around provisional funding, but it is not, it is certainly not a doom and gloom scenario. Our role as CJC staff is to assist those counties to receive second-year funding. Now, so that's provisional funding. For full funding, of course, the award is for 2 years. We, as CJC staff, can provide technical assistance. However, we do have capacity constraints at the level of technical assistance that we can provide. Now, the formula grant, the Grant Review Committee has adopted a multi-tiered system of review. The reasons for this are many, but primary among them is a report drafted by an advisory committee that took a look at the Justice Reinvestment Program from top down. This report was submitted to the legislature in 2020. We, as the commission, significant changes. Among those changes was elongation of the grant application period. We also, in combination with the Grant Review Committee, adopted a multi-tiered system of review, which we'll walk through now.
So I'm going to walk through the way that CJC staff put together or decide how to put together pieces of information for the GRC when we go into these meetings and make sure that we have everything available, everything that's most useful, depending on the county's specific circumstances for the GRC to consider. So the very first thing that we as staff and the GRC consider when triaging is county size. And so we base some of the decision-making about what data to initially present based on the population of the county. This is because counties with smaller populations naturally have a smaller number of individuals being sentenced to prison for JRI crimes. And when those numbers are lower and we start to look at them based on demographic information or break them up over time periods, it increases the volatility of the data. And so some of the tools we may use for larger counties may not be appropriate for those smaller counties. So CJC staff and the GRC came together and sort of concluded that this 35,000 population mark is appropriate, at least for an initial division of smaller versus larger counties. And we can see that with this plot, which is a little bit small for folks in the room, I'm sorry, but About 15 of the counties fall below that 35,000 mark, and those are shown in blue. And then the counties above 35,000 population are shown there in yellow. And I think that folks in the room can't read this, but at the bottom of that plot, that is showing prison admissions. And so what we really see there, that plot is just telling us that the number of prison admissions for each county is, of course, increases roughly linearly with the population of the county, which is why we feel that that 35,000 population mark is really reasonable. And then one thing I want to note too is that just because CJC staff and the GRC take this initial look at like sort of smaller and larger counties doesn't mean that the data elements we always provide for the larger counties can't be looked at for the smaller counties. And we do have instances where the GRC wants to dig a little deeper into these smaller counties, and we could take a look at any of the data elements that we have prepared for larger counties, for smaller counties as well. So this is just another look at that same grouping there, and really what this plot is telling us is that those counties with under 35,000 population make up about 4.2 million of the overall formula funding budget for the 23-25 biennium, whereas those, I'm sorry, it is so small I can't read it. Those above 35,000 make up 41.5 million of the overall funding. And so finally, we can move into what we sort of call like a triaging plot. And so this takes two particular data elements. And sort of before I move into this, I want to reiterate that when I talk about prison use, I'm probably going to say just prison use a couple of times. We're really talking about JRP prison use. So this is for those property, drug, and driving crimes. And so all the prison use measures from here throughout the presentation will be only for those crimes. But this plot takes a look at what we call difference from baseline and difference from previous year. And what this really is difference in JRP prison use from a baseline that is based on their JRP prison use average from 2012 to 2015 at the start of the program. And then from previous year, really, as we can see, this plot is for July of 2023. So that looks at the difference in their prison use from July of 2022 to July of 2023. So at the time this plot was put together, looking at sort of where their recent prison use movement has been. So those counties that are in the top right-hand portion of the plot, Polk, Jackson, and Clackamas, have seen an increase above their baseline in prison use. So sort of two indicators of overall rise in prison use. And then those that are in that yellow quadrant are below their baseline, however, have seen recent increase in their prison use. And then those that are in the green quadrant are below their baseline and have seen a decrease in their prison use.
So next, we'll take a look at the formula applications. And so the Grant Review Committee, and then I guess by extension, you all on the commission, you're charged with specific review decisions. So this is coming from Oregon Administrative Rule. Specifically, you're tasked with reviewing and evaluating each grant review or grant application based on the following criteria. I'll highlight just a few of them. The first two deal with program design, specifically whether or not the program as submitted in the grant application is designed to reduce recidivism and whether or not it is designed to reduce prison usage. And so that is a qualitative review. Now, the third bullet point here is to the extent which the applicant's county has historically reduced prison usage by individuals convicted of property crimes and driving crimes. And so that's in large part what those triaging tools are used for. It takes a look specifically at historic prison usage, which is why the Grant Review Committee has adopted those tools. And then, of course, they take a look at public safety, individual accountability, and then you all, as the commission, if you'd like, you can include other criteria in the solicitation. So here are the different, what I'll call buckets of review. So we, as CJC staff, we proactively prepare here. So for the orange counties, so Clackamas, Jackson, Polk, who were above their prison baseline and increasing usage. We present not only prison usage data, but also data by crime type. So a little deeper quantitative dive. We do a feedback review. So because this is now their second application that they have received feedback from the grant review committee, we take a look at, okay, what did they do with that feedback? What changes did they make? And then, of course, we do a program analysis. For the yellow counties, we take a look at the prison usage data and then feedback review and program analysis. So we are not proactively providing a deeper dive data. However, we have interactive dashboards, which at any moment we could go live to, and the grant review committee on occasion does do that. Last are the two different greens. So it's the counties with populations under 35,000 and those who are below their historic baseline, as well as decreasing prison usage. So for them, because of their historic prison usage, we are only proactively presenting a program analysis and then looking at the feedback that the grant review committee did or provided and how they responded to that feedback. Now, there's a caveat. So for counties that receive feedback that referenced either prison usage or the racial disparity tool, which we have presented to you all in the past, that relevant data is presented regardless of what triaging category they're in. So if there was feedback specific to the racial disparity tool, for example, that was presented so that the grant review committee could see what their feedback was about, as an example. So with that, I'll take a moment to talk about the 31 counties here. So all of these counties, so the counties that applied with the exception of Clackamas and Jackson, which we'll talk about in just a moment, they are recommended to receive full 2-year funding. So this is the grant review committee's recommendation. And so Chair Solomon, if you would like, you of course could have a vote on these 31 right now.
Yeah. Let's vote on the 31. But let's maybe take out the counties the commissioners are going to want to declare potential conflicts on. Washington's one of the. No, not Washington, Scott. So we've got Washington, Yamhill, Multnomah, and Lane. And Douglas. So if we could pull those out and do the remaining counties as one block, and then we'll do those
Sure.
4 or 5 counties separately.
You can go here.
Mr. Chair, can I ask a
Yeah.
real quick question, staff?
Yeah.
I agree with everything you just said. That makes perfect sense. I think that's the way we've handled it before. Will our vote on these 31 impact the funding resources? Will it essentially alter our potential options for the remaining 2 counties we're going to be talking about?
Thank you for the question. No, it does not, because it's a formula grant. It will not impact future decisions.
Then I'm cool.
Great. All right,
You want me to start it out?
yeah, if you want to, make a motion.
I will make a motion to approve all 31 of these applications with the exception of Douglas, Washington, Lane, Multnomah, and Yamhill.
All right, is there a second to the motion made by? Seconded by Commissioner Freeman. All those in favor signify, are we doing roll call? Want to do,
I can call roll.
okay, let's do roll call.
Commissioner.
We know you.
Yes. Commissioner Beach,
Yes.
Vice Chair Bovet,
Yes.
Commissioner Freeman,
Yes.
Commissioner McPherson,
Yes.
and Chair Solomon.
Yes.
That's unanimous, Chair.
All right, let's take the other counties individually. I'd entertain a motion for Douglas County.
I'll make a motion to approve the Douglas County application for JRI formula funding.
Is there a second?
I'll second.
Okay, motion made by Commissioner Bovet, seconded by Commissioner Auxier. All those in,
Beach,
Yes.
Vice Chair Bovet,
Yes.
Commissioner Freeman,
Same.
Commissioner McPherson,
yes.
and Chair Solomon.
Yes. Great.
If I can, I'll just make a motion to approve the Lane County application for Justice Reinvestment Formula Grant. funding.
Is there a second?
I'll second.
All right, motion made by Commissioner Bovet, seconded by Commissioner Beach. Roll call, please.
Commissioner Auxier,
Yes.
Commissioner Beach,
Yes.
Vice Chair Bovet,
Yes.
Commissioner Freeman,
Yes.
Commissioner McPherson,
Yes.
Chair Solomon.
Abstain.
I'll just keep rolling if you want. So next will be Multnomah. So I'd make a motion to approve the Multnomah County application for continued JRI grant funding under the Formula Grant Program.
Second.
I'll second.
All right, motion by Commissioner Bovet, seconded by Commissioner Beach. Roll call.
Commissioner Auxier,
Abstain.
Commissioner Beach,
Yes.
Vice Chair Bovet,
Yes.
Commissioner Freeman,
Yes.
Commissioner McPherson,
Abstain.
and Chair Solomon.
Yeah.
I'll do one more, but then somebody else is going to have to take
Yeah,
over.
yeah.
Last one I can do, make a motion to approve the Yamhill County grant application for grant funding under the Formula JRI Formula Grant.
Second.
Give me a second.
All right, motion made by Commissioner Bovet, seconded by Commissioner Freeman. Roll call, please.
Commissioner Auxier,
Yes.
Commissioner Beach,
Abstain.
Vice Chair Bovet,
Yes.
Commissioner Freeman,
Yes.
Commissioner McPherson,
Yes.
and Chair Solomon.
Yes. All right, I would entertain a motion to approve formula funding for Washington County. So make that.
I'll make that motion.
All right. Is there a second?
I'll second.
All right, motion made by Commissioner Freeman, seconded by Commissioner Beach for Washington County. Roll call.
Commissioner Auxier,
Yes.
Commissioner Beach,
Yes.
Vice Chair Bovet,
Abstain.
Commissioner Freeman,
Yes.
Commissioner McPherson,
Abstain.
and Vice Chair Solomon.
Yes. All right, now let's talk about the provisional counties.
Sure. Okay, so for the provisional counties, what we'll do, we'll walk through the elements that were presented to the grant review committee. So you can get a full picture of kind of their beyond that with the data, and then also we will be presenting the specific recommendations that the grant review committee made for each of these counties. So we'll take them one by one. Going alphabetically, we have Clackamas County, and so I'll turn it over to Catherine.
All right, so this probably looks fairly familiar to most of you, but I'll do a quick review of, this is sort of our main JRI prison use page that we have on our dashboard, and it gives sort of our most basic information about prison use for every county. The main plot shows the 1-year rolling sum of prison months used by the county for JRP eligible crimes, alongside the baseline for that county. And again, that baseline is based on the average prison use over that 2012 to 2015 time period. On the right-hand side, we have two plots that show the two elements that go into the calculation for those total prison months used, which are the length of stay and the number of intakes. And then the average length of stay in that teeny tiny plot is shown by the center line in those yellow boxes for each calendar year. And then, of course, the bottom right-hand plot of prison intakes is just a histogram of the number of intakes. For Clackamas County here, we can see in the main plot that their JRP prison use remained relatively steady and above their baseline from about 2014 until the COVID-19 pandemic hit in 2020, at which point it dropped drastically. But in the last year, which for this plot was between July of 2022 and July of 2023, they saw an increase in prison use of just over 2,000 months and ended above their baseline and slightly above their typical prison use prior to the pandemic. On the top right-hand plot there on the slide, we can actually see that their average length of stay may have decreased slightly from 2022 to 2023, keeping in mind this only includes data through July of 2023. But we do see a sharp increase in their number of intakes in the bottom right-hand plot, which is mostly what's contributing to their overall
Catherine? I'm sorry to interrupt, but I think that it got muted. We can't hear you.
How about now?
Yes, we can hear you now.
Avery, where did we lose sound? Can I go back and reiterate something?
I would do at least the last 2 slides.
Okay.
Mhm.
I will do, yes, I will start here. So for Clackamas County, for this main prison use plot here, okay. Yeah, thank you for letting me know. Sorry about that. Yeah, so for their main prison use plot here, we can see that Clackamas County saw a pretty steady prison use rate or prison use from about 2014 to 2020, slightly above their baseline, but saw a drop, of course, during the COVID-19 pandemic, like most counties. But from July of 2022 to July of 2023, they saw an increase of about 2,000 prison months and ended in July of 2023, both above their baseline and towards the top end of what their typical prison use looked like pre-pandemic. And if we want to take a look at the 2 elements that sort of make up that overall prison use measure, we can see that on the top right-hand side of the plot, or at the plot on the top right-hand side of the page, excuse me, their average length of stay may have decreased slightly, but it looks like their spike in intakes starting in about 2022 is what has contributed to their most recent increase in prison use overall. All right, and the first piece of GRC feedback related to data that Clackamas County prison usage hasn't substantively decreased over the past decade. So the GRC asked them to please describe the changes that need to be made to their existing programs to reduce prison usage generally, and then for property crimes in particular. So we presented these sentencing trend plots to the GRC, broken down by drug, property, and driving crimes specifically, where property crime is in that light blue. And these are the top right-hand plot, again, shows sentence length or length of stay. And then the bottom right-hand plot shows number of intakes. So we can see that Clackamas County's average length of stay for property crime has slowly increased over the past decade or so, and that their number of intakes has increased significantly starting in about 2022. And Clackamas County's response to this GRC feedback was that it's unclear what's driving that increase in longer-term prison rate for property crimes, but they plan to do a deeper dive into their data to find out. Okay. So again, this is just a second look that we provided to the GRC at Clackamas County's prison use, and this is really per capita prison use. So it's easier to their geographic peers. So Clackamas County is in red there, the statewide rate is in black, and then some of their geographic peers, including Marion, Multnomah, and Washington, are in those shades of blue. So for a very long time, Clackamas County's per capita prison usage rate has been less than the statewide rate and at the lower middle end of their geographic peers. However, starting in 2022, an increase in their per capita prison use rate has brought them not only above all their geographic peers, but also above the statewide rate as a whole.
So the grant review committee is recommending provisional funding, and they've indicated that they would like second-year funding to be contingent upon Clackamas County doing a few things, which are outlined on this slide. First is they would like Clackamas County to conduct the programmatic review and thoroughly explain the lack of a decline in prison usage over the last 10 years. And focus in on the recent increase in property crime intakes as well. Lastly, they would like Clackamas County to provide responsive services and what actions have been taken following the recommendations of a 3-year study completed by county partners. That's in reference to a piece in the application where they mentioned that there was this 3-year study being conducted by an outside research group that was wrapping up basically right after the application was due. And so the grant review committee would like an update on how that's going and what changes are being made as a result of that study. So this is our presentation or reflection of the recommendation from the grant review committee on Clackamas County. Chair Solomon, if you'd like, you could consider Clackamas County individually now.
I'm just curious if staff have any additional thoughts beyond what the GRC recommended.
So if you all approve the provisional funding recommendation from the GRC, we will work with Clackamas County on these specific items. However, in those conversations, we'll have conversations not only with the primary grant writer, but also the county as a whole, their local public safety coordinating council. So it would not surprise me if we talk about other things as well. However, we as staff, we're really focused on what the GRC has recommended. We agree with their recommendations. So there's not anything we would add, I guess, if that's your question.
Yeah, right.
Mr. Chair?
Yep.
Sorry. Rob.
No, go ahead.
So I got just a couple questions and really it will relate to both requests. So, we got to hear it a couple times because the sound wasn't working right. You also mentioned several times in presenting the data, because of the pandemic, there was a dip and then an increase. But during that same time frame, two other things that are pretty important happened. You failed to mention those. Measure 110 took effect, and the no bid sentencing or trial happened also. So those two things must have some impact, and they were not mentioned. Did you include any of that consideration in the data collection?
So these data are just from the DOC data in general. So we didn't do any analysis of that, and that's more of a timing thing. And you're right, I didn't mention those other things, but those undoubtedly have some effect in there as well. We're not able to parse out exactly what those are at this level. If we were to work with a county individual, but we haven't done that proactively for the GRC. If for a county, they wanted to take a look at that and we were able to help due to maybe provisional funding, being able to give them more of our resources, we could look at that.
Something I learned a lot, I continue. Yeah, something I learned a long time ago is got to be a little careful with data and data sets. The quickest and best way, not best way, the quickest and fastest way to lower crime rates is to have less law enforcement. You know that? With less law enforcement, there's less arrests and there's less people going to prison, and the rates look worse, although the crime in your community goes way up. So I'm curious on both of these data sets that you have in red. Did you look to see if maybe those counties had hired more law enforcement officers or were doing more enforcement activities or dealing with, Southern Oregon is dealing with cartels coming in and doing, all those things could affect your data set and make it look different than other counties. The fact that they're maybe doing more law enforcement or more, active crime enforcement may also drive these numbers. Was that looked at?
Well, so the application process did really allow for counties to dig into some of that and provide some of that information to us. And so you'll see, particularly for Jackson County in a moment, how some of them considered those possibilities in their counties and responded to some GRC feedback around that.
Because finally, I'll end, and I know Rob's got you can go a little bit too.
I've got a few questions too.
So I want to caution this commission on this provisional funding concept. Currently at the county level, it's almost impossible to hire staff. And I'm talking all levels of staff, but specifically deputy DAs, law enforcement officers, people that are going to be important for these programs to be successful. Having a provisional funding hanging over a county is going to make it even more difficult for them to keep their staff or to hire new staff. So I know you think it's just an administrative tool to get more data. I will caution everybody in understanding that it will impact these counties in ways that you may not be thinking about. I've got
two questions, but
Go ahead.
you want me to do mine or?
Yeah, go ahead.
I have two questions, just, so before us here now, or potentially before us here now is approval of Clackamas. And we have a recommendation from the grant review committee for 1-year provisional funding. And remind me again, if we reject that and decide to go, no, we'd really like to fund them fully at 2, or reject it the other way. Remind me again what happens at that point.
Sure, thank you for the question. At that point, it would go back to the grant review committee for reconsideration. We as staff would strongly recommend that you give specific guidance to the grant review committee if you were to move in that direction, but then the grant review committee would reconvene, reconsider, and then make a perhaps different recommendation back to you all. You would reconvene perhaps in the January or February meeting to reconsider that recommendation.
Can you tell me why that is?
That is as a result of House Bill 3064. So
And that bill did what?
a whole lot of things, but specific to this is that it changed the interaction between the grant review committee and the Criminal Justice Commission.
Took away some of our power. Thanks. That's all I needed. What does Clackamas think of this?
Sure. So you know how I
Are
said,
they supportive of a 1-year provision?
I don't know if I would go so far as to say supportive,
Okay.
but they're understanding. They're willing to work with us. They are willing to work with us is the best way to capture that.
That's good. Okay. Well, I'll just make my quick statement and then let it go. As those who've been on this commission for enough years are familiar, I struggle with a couple of issues. One is primarily funding for our diversionary programs. I've had a little bit to do with some of those during my career, including our specialty court programs, drug court, JRI, both and a variety of others. To the point where pre-COVID, we had the smallest percentage of non-violent offenders in our prison system in any state, and we avoided opening a new prison. I consider that a successful program. Other people may not. But the whole idea behind House Bill 3194, what we're now calling apparently JRP, which I'm fine with these, I still say JRI, because I'm using JRI. The whole idea is to give counties the resources to take nonviolent offenders who are suffering from substance abuse and or mental health issues, or both, and divert them away from being locked up and into treatment and recovery. It's the whole basis of these diversion programs. I call them generically community harm reduction, but others may disagree with that phrasing, but it's just something I came up with. But my struggle with this is, well, two things. One, we have consistently for the last 35 years seen an overall decline in crime rates in America, and Oregon is no exception. Oregon has traditionally tracked at a higher rate for property crimes than the national average, statistically significantly. But we have statistically significantly tracked at a lower rate for violent crime. So apparently Oregonians like to steal from each other, but we don't like to beat up on each other, which I consider that actually pretty good in a sordid sort of way. But the reality is that through all of this, things have been sliding downward really since the early 90s. Contrary, by the way, to what public perception is and what the media tells. That changed 2 years ago. Property crimes are going up and violent crimes are going up in Oregon. And some might argue some of the rates are at the high end, the increases. So I have the same questions that Commissioner Freeman does, which is one of the ways to increase criminal justice usage is to increase law enforcement. One of the ways to decrease is to decrease law enforcement. I have no idea whether Clackamas is actually doing the right thing here by increasing law enforcement presence when crimes are going up. I can't fault them for that. In fact, they may be ahead of the game. I don't know because the data doesn't really tell me one way or the other. And apparently Clackamas is not making an assertion. I think Jackson is a little more understandable. They were here and told you how successful their JRI programs are. but they're seeing the spike in crime rates in the last 2 years as well. So I'm really struggling with the notion of putting either of these two on a provisional 1-year funding cycle with additional requirements from a grant review committee that has essentially usurped part of the power by state law, I understand, from this commission. So I'm really struggling here. I'm probably not going to vote to support this provisional 1-year funding because I want the CJC grant review committee to examine the issues of crime rates and the utilization of law enforcement in an ever-evolving and expanding justice-involved system right now, where we have really more than a doubling of the people who are suffering from substance abuse combined with mental illness. We can talk about the reasons for it. Some of them have been alluded to by Commissioner Freeman, and he's spot on. So I want to associate myself with everything he said. But, you know, we may send this back and they may send it right back to us. I know we did this little tango with a few years ago for different reasons, by the way. And so I get the idea of 1-year provisional funding to help people that want to participate and get people who are suffering from substance use and mental health and or both out of the justice system and into treatment and recovery. I don't think what we're doing here is the right way to go about it. And I'll stop talking.
I'll just make a quick comment and open Dr. Rogers. I understand the frustrations expressed by Commissioner Freeman that. I also recognize that one of the primary tenets of House Bill 3194 is to reduce counties' dependence on prison beds, and we have to have some metric for evaluating that. And we have charged the grant review committee with evaluating, based on very specific metrics, the utilization of prison. And I feel like if we don't put these counties on provisional status, given their current prison utilization, we may as well scrap provisional status and do something new because it becomes meaningless. So, you know, to me, the provisional status isn't, we're not taking funding from them. We are merely stating that there are some issues that we've identified that we feel require greater analysis and would benefit from the support of the commission. Hence the first year funding being provisional. So that's kind of where I land on this, but I'm curious where other commissioners stand.
Well, Chair Solomon, I have a question that I'd like to ask Mr. Davidson. That's sort of gets to these issues a little bit. Is, you know, my thinking is, having been in the position of having to defend my county's spike in prison usage on occasion when I was in Columbia County, I always felt like the first thing we did in our JRI team was look for phenomena that were unique to Columbia County to try to explain why the spike existed. Has Clackamas County done that? Because it seems to me like they would be in the best position to explain the spike.
Yes, thank you for the question. They did begin to explain that, though. They noted that they want to do a deeper dive, specifically around property crime, and they're open to doing deeper dive.
Were they able to offer some theories as to why?
I would have to go back to their application to remind myself. So there were, I guess, two separate thoughts. The Clackamas County spent quite a bit of their application talking about the recent spike in property crime and reasons for that, among them the pandemic, clearing of a case backlog. However, they did not, and the grant review committee noted this, they did not identify or really dig into the 10-year, the last 10 years of prison usage. I want to make sure I frame it correctly. The grant review committee noted the lack of a decline in prison usage over the last decade. So the Clackamas County did not articulate reasons why that might be, why that has not changed.
Other comments?
I just mentioned that it seems a little bit like reverse incentive. Do law enforcement and find criminals and convict them. Through this process, you're gonna lose funding. Or potentially lose funding.
I wouldn't say convict them. If you convict them and send them to prison,
But
the idea is to, you know, take people that are convicted of property crimes.
do something else.
Yeah, yeah.
Chair, if I may.
Yeah.
I completely agree with the chair, but I also agree with the other commissioners. And again, I know this is based on prison reduction, but in light of what we all know has been a huge decrease in grant and aid for community corrections, and the majority of these prison diversions fall under community corrections, I have a great deal of fear of all the cutting of programs and losing these programs because, and maybe this would help me too, if you explain what the provisional process looks
Sure.
like, because we're at the end of November.
Yeah.
You're saying it's for 1 year. Does that mean they have till July to get all this done? How does that work? I would hate to see these prison division programs completely disappear. You know, as Commissioner Freeman mentioned, it is difficult to hire staff. And you really don't want to hire staff if you don't know if you're going to have funding in 7 months.
Sure.
So maybe if you could
Yeah.
explain that piece of.
So in previous biennia, the turnaround has been rather tight, with applications for second year funding being due in either April or May. However, if you move forward with these two,
Do I know where what? I can't hear you. Are they going to?
If folks online can mute themselves, please.
so the turnaround has been tight. However, if you were to move forward with either one of these counties or both of these counties, we would reach out to the counties and ask them what kind of timeline works for them. The previous feedback that we've received from other counties was that they wanted certainty before their counties did their own annual budgets. That may not be the case for Clackamas or Jackson. Justice Reinvestment is a somewhat unique program where it's a biennial program. However, instead of a 24-month program, it is a 30-month project period. And so both Clackamas and Jackson, for example, are still spending down 23 funding into the month of December. And so conceivably, it could be a longer time period. But those are all conversations that we would want to have with the counties themselves.
And you just mentioned another barrier. You know, I know in my county, we start budgeting in January.
Mhm.
And I have to, you know, just to ask these counties to do their best guess, do I put it in for the 24-25? Do I not? It's just a lot of uncertainty, such important programs.
Yes.
Other discussions or questions for staff?
Just a process question. I'm sorry, go ahead.
I was just gonna make a comment. So, go ahead.
I'm just gonna want to make sure I understand what Commissioner Bobette said around our choices today are to approve a 1-year provisional or not to approve it and send it back and there's nothing approved. Is that what I'm hearing?
For the time being, there would be nothing approved, yes.
That's correct. Based on state law that changed 3 years ago.
It's a heck of a choice, isn't it?
It's a heck of a choice.
Meaning that the grant review committee would review again and then come back with potentially the same recommendation. So, yeah, difficult decision because we're
I might have greater uncertainty rather than, yeah.
That's why I was curious about what Clackamas had to say. It's a quandary.
It is, and again, I think it speaks to the relationship between the grant review committee and the commission. And, you know, really how much power we have in this process. Outside of approving recommendations. I mean, we can send stuff back with our direction.
Mhm.
But it's not binding,
Correct.
correct? Go ahead, Commissioner.
Yeah, thank you. I was going to say that I agree with Chair Solomon's comments. The reasons on the slide, your comments, the reasons on the slide, the presentation from staff, which is well done. And the bottom line is there's a lack of decline in prison usage and there's an increase in prison usage. It goes against the tenets of the program. So I would certainly agree to provisional funding. That's why I would agree with it.
And that's again. Sorry.
I'm Carl McPherson. I'm the Executive Director of Metropolitan Public Defender.
Okay. Great. That's just wonderful. I just find it really strange that we're talking about an increasing property crime, escalating kind of out of control. Our justice system is lacking lawyers. OPDS is struggling. We're lacking deputy district attorneys. And we're here, we're putting a diversion program on a string because Clackamas is using more prison when crime is going up. I'm really worried about losing our diversion programs because eventually the public is going to react very poorly, I fear. I really do. I have some very serious concerns about the loss of drug court programs, HOPE, justice reinvestment, specialty court programs that we don't even have enough funding to give out right now, which we haven't even got to. These programs have been essentially strangled. And there are diversion programs, and I don't get the logic of it. So I just respectfully disagree with you, sir.
It's fine. And the bottom line is Clackamas couldn't even answer as to why the increase is occurring and does not have an answer for what's happened over the last decade. And provisional status gives an opportunity for Clackamas to actually get help from this commission and the staff to be able to answer those questions. Because ultimately, the purpose of this program is to reduce prison usage, not to increase law enforcement and increase prison intakes. Provisional status seems to me the best opportunity to utilize this excellent staff to help Clackamas answer the questions and be able to come in line with the tenets of the program, which is why I support provisional. Why I would support the conclusion of the grant funding committee that went through all the applications and been doing this, the ultimate experience with over 100 years. I know many of the people that were on that grant review committee. I have tremendous respect for it. So I'm going to defer to their recommendation for all the reasons that Commissioner Solomon stated and the staff.
Can you pull back up the membership of the grant review committee? Just so we're all clear on who we're talking about.
Please close your eyes. This will go fast. There we go. Okay.
We have members of the legislature, Lane County District Attorney Patty Perlow,
Chief of Police, Matt
Chief of Police from
Celeste, right?
right? Krupp, who's the Senate or House Judiciary Chair, Sarah Stewart, Kids First, a local program here in Lane County that does forensic work for kids experienced abuse. Nate Galliran, Washington County Community Corrections, Bronson James from State Supreme Court, County Commissioner from Benton, a sheriff in Multnomah County, Representative Conrad, and vacant state senate seat. So those are the members who came up with this recommendation, correct?
That's correct.
I agree. That's a great committee, and I'm not trying to fault anything that they're recommending. But I will, go back to this measuring only reduction in prison sentences. I happened to be in the legislature when the Justice Reinvestment Act was debated and acted upon. And I was actually the vice chair of the Ways and Means Subcommittee for Public Safety. So I was very involved in this conversation. The entire premise of lowering jail beds to save money was not the only part of that conversation. It was to do it safely and make our communities safer. Right? So we can't just measure the fact that, we want less people in prison. We have to also take into account that there's less crimes being committed. At the same time, we're trying to implement the Justice Reinvestment Act across the state. Other things are happening that are causing more crime. And it seems like those things are colliding. And just the fact that, and I know we're not talking about Jackson County yet, but just about the fact that the review committee wants the county to explain their assertion that the increase is tied to Measure 110, tells me somebody's disconnected here. I thought that was common knowledge, that there's more crime going on because of Measure 110. And the concept of having people reoffend prior to trial, they used to be held pre-trial, that they somehow need to explain that. That's common sense. And these people are reoffending because they're not in jail. When you're in jail, you can't commit property crimes. So I think somebody missed something here. And when I read these things they want them to report on, I mean, again, it seems like common knowledge to me that, you know, Measure 110 is creating more property crimes. I thought everybody understood that. So anyway.
So, I mean, we've got a lot of researchers in the room here, people smarter than I am. I haven't seen anything that has shown empirically a direct correlation between increase in property crime and the passage of Measure 110s. And someone please correct me if I'm wrong.
Put up the chart where you had the big dip for COVID. I mean, don't say COVID, say Measure 110.
Are you talking about with the county?
Yeah,
But if that was the case, why wouldn't we see that in every county?
I think to a large degree, some counties don't have the capacity to deal with it. And I can tell you in our county, we just don't have the DAs to prosecute the crimes that are happening. We don't have law enforcement to deal with it.
Okay, that's where I think we need to get more information. I think it's incumbent on the counties to provide us with more detail in their application about what those issues are. And I didn't see that in Clackamas County's application.
Fair enough.
Fair enough. Let's look at Jackson County and then we can do these votes on both of them.
Okay, so for Jackson County, similar format, we'll present the data that was presented to the grant review committee and then wrap it up with their recommendation.
Right, so we have the same overall prison use plot here for Jackson County that we saw for Clackamas, which has this 1-year rolling sum of their overall prison usage. And over the long term, we see that Jackson County's prison use has steadily been increasing and has remained generally over their baseline since around 2016. In the last year, as of July of 23, so between July of 22 and July of 23, we saw an increase in JRP prison use of about 650 prison months, and ending in July of 23 above their baseline. If we take a look at the elements that make that up, it appears that their average length of stay did not change between 2022 and 2023, but an increase in intakes is what has resulted in their overall prison use increase over that time period. All right, so the first piece of data related GRC feedback that Jackson County received was to please explain why property crime prison intakes have increased significantly over the last year. And again, we have those same sentencing trend plots on the right-hand side with property crime being indicated in light blue. We do see that spike in intakes for property crimes starting in about 2022. And Jackson County's response was that this represents a clearing of their case backlog as well as an increase of property crime tied to Measure 110 implementation. Another piece of GRC feedback for Jackson County was to please explain why their average sentence length for prison intakes for drug crimes was 5 months higher than the statewide average, 36 months versus 31 months. So on the right-hand side, we have a histogram of statewide all of the prison intakes for drug crimes, or excuse me, of all the prison sentence lengths for drug crimes for the state. And that histogram, the average is 31 months. Whereas we can see with that yellow line that Jackson County's average sentence length was 36 months. Jackson County responded that Medford in particular has a very active law enforcement team in a smaller jail, so that individuals booked into jail are released, picked up on other charges, leading to longer sentences later on. And then finally, the last data-related piece of feedback that the GRC provided Jackson County was to please address the disparity in prison sentences for Latino men and how they plan to address or expand on what they're currently doing to address it. This looks fairly small, but hopefully you can see it well enough. So the probation racial disparity tool on the left-hand side is a piece of our JRI Prison Use dashboard. And this particular tool, CJC staff developed at the request of the GRC to create an equity tool for all the counties. And for some of you, I think we earlier this year, we did go over this and sort of walk through how this tool works. And we're happy to do that if we need to, but for Jackson County in particular, for this piece of GRC feedback, what we're interested in is for this plot, if there's a point at 0, that means that we have parity between the non-white and white group in the rate of being sentenced to prison. So positive values indicate that more individuals of the non-white group, in this case Latino men, would need to receive probation instead of prison sentences in order to reach parity with the white group. So we can see here that there are multiple years for which more Latino men would have needed to receive probation instead of prison sentences to reach parity with white men. And Jackson County responded to this feedback that they have put in place training programs, policies, and a team of equity, diversity, and inclusion champions to address this topic of EDI, and they're hiring 1 additional bilingual PO and have implemented a 9-point equity plan.
I'll just add that of the 33 counties that the grant review committee reviewed, they looked at the racial disparity tool for every single one of those 33 counties, and then they only asked 2 of those counties, Jackson and Malheur, to respond to particular feedback on that. So that's why Jackson County is presented in that way. So in summary, the grant review committee is recommending provisional funding with second-year funding contingent upon the county conducting a programmatic and data review and thoroughly explaining the recent increase in property crime intakes and the county's assertion that the increase is tied to Measure 110. I'll note here that for all of these data requests, the GRC has requested, and we as CJC staff will go ahead and work with the counties to the best extent possible, utilizing administrative data to answer those questions. The second point here is to disaggregate that above data by race and ethnicity to better understand the disparities occurring. Third here is to conduct a data review and that thoroughly explains, thoroughly explains the county's claim that prison usage has increased because of the cumulative charges picked up when someone is released from jail instead of being held pretrial, and what those cumulative charges are that are contributing to higher than average sentence length. And then lastly, to take a look at that third piece, but disaggregated by race and ethnicity to better understand the disparities that are occurring. So that is Jackson County.
Questions from commissioners about the Jackson County data recommendation?
Just, I guess we've heard from the Jackson County, Kiki was here and talked to us, but what is Jackson County's position on the GRC recommendation? Would they just prefer to have us just approve the 1-year provisional and move forward, or what's their take? Clackamas apparently didn't answer that, but did Jackson?
No, I have not spoken with Jackson about the particular back and forth that may happen with the grant review committee.
I have a couple of thoughts about the responses that they provided. Can you go back?
Yes.
So on this one, I thought it was curious that their response was to address this by placing training programs and policies around EDI and hiring a bilingual PO. It seems to me that these disparities are more in sentencing and have to do with prosecution and the courts and less to do with parole and probation. So I just found that response a little curious.
There is, depending on the county, and interplay there based on how, and I'm not saying this is true of Jackson County, but the confidence that the prosecutor's office may have in community corrections. And so if they know that there's a bilingual PO, perhaps they have more confidence in downward reporting. I would defer to others who have been district attorneys to speak to that.
Mr. Chair.
Yeah.
Would the issues around illegal marijuana and cartel activity affect this data? I mean, there's a tremendous problem in Southern Oregon with Mexican cartel, could lead to this population being, prosecuted more. Is that going to affect the way the data set is, or does it just have to do with the sentencing?
This is only sentencing data.
Okay.
So at this point, at the point at which folks fall into this data set that we use to create the measure, they have already been convicted, and it's only a sentencing decision.
So, I noticed that, Ms. Parker Rose has her hand up, and maybe she can provide some additional insights. Kiki, are you there?
Chair Solomon, I am. Thank you for the opportunity. I think when I put my hand up, I was responding to Commissioner Bovet. I think that in the packet of information that we sent and asked that the commissioners review before today's meeting, we put that the program that we've identified that will assist us in moving forward in that jail reentry program would help reduce the number of folks going out of jail because we have a lack of jail space quickly, and give us an opportunity to case manage those. I think Commissioner Bovet's question was, what was Jackson County's response? And in that response, we put that, as I've heard additional commissioners articulate, it would be difficult to begin a new program with only 1 year provisional funding when we need to hire folks, create the program. And so our response would be, we would have to reconsider that program that we have collectively in our community identified as something that can assist us moving forward. So to answer Commissioner Bovet's question, we would definitely need to reevaluate whether or not we can move forward with such programming. Secondly, I would like to address that these were follow-up questions provided by the Grant Review Committee. In our initial applications, we did identify and try to address the disparity issues that have been identified. And I believe one of the commissioners just articulated what we as well articulated, which we do have a very high cartel drug issue within our community. Many of the folks that are coming through our community and being arrested for large quantities of drugs do not reside in our community and do end up with a higher prison sentence. We have a very active police force with our Medford Police Department, who, if you report a crime, they respond to the crime. We don't have an online reporting system with that law enforcement agency. We have tried to address all of the issues that were brought up through the Grant Review Committee, including doing that deep dive that I alluded to in my opening remarks, but also in the packet of information that was provided to the Criminal Justice Commission at the end of last week. I hope that has answered some of those questions that you may have asked. I appreciate the opportunity to be here and provide answers to those questions as the commission deliberates the outcome for us.
Great. Thank you very much.
Mr. Chair, can I ask?
Yeah.
Kiki, just
Yeah.
real quick. Kiki, if you could stay on. This is Commissioner Bovet. I guess I'm interested really in the bottom line, which is you've already heard, and I think you're probably aware that this commission doesn't have authority to approve the grant at its full 2 years. Our choices are to accept the recommendation of the Grant Review Committee and put you on a provisional 1 year, or send it back to the GRC for further consideration. Does Jackson County have a position on which of those two options we should take? Sorry to put you in that box, but that's kind of what I'm feeling right now.
Commissioner Bovet, thank you for the question. I'm going to throw some spaghetti on the wall here. I think the language that was referred to of the options for the Criminal Justice Commission was must and not shall. I don't know if that changes the commission's ability to make decisions, but that was what I saw in that language. Now, outside of that, it would be better for us if we knew that we could continue with funding for at least 18 months so that we could create and hire folks moving forward. Because again, the 1 year provisional funding with the unknown of what that looks like afterwards creates a barrier for us in moving forward with, again, a program we've identified as would be super beneficial for our community.
Sorry, those aren't choices for us. Our choices today are to
That's right.
approve the 1-year recommendation and send the 1 year out and put you on provisional. Or second choice is not to approve it, send it back to the review committee with specific comments or ideas from us, and then wait for them to get back to us. That's our 2 choices. So those 2 choices, does Jackson County have a choice they would prefer?
Commissioner, again, I think it would be better if we had certainty in the programming going forward. So if we are granted provisional, we would, again, likely not begin the program. If we waited and heard whether or not we were funded for, say, 18 months, if that's how long it's going to take, it would make us be in a better position moving forward. I will tell you that we have responded to these things that have been brought up from the grant review committee, and that was the information outside of the information about the Latino male population. We felt like we had addressed that in our original application. So we are prepared to respond as, as quickly as we can, because we've already done the deep dive and we have that data to provide those answers to the grant review committee.
Thank you, Kiki. Was there any other questions for her at this time?
I don't think I know what to do, but
Yeah,
yeah.
let's deliberate. This one's a little trickier for me. Because I think that in many ways, Jackson County has attempted to respond and explain kind of the issues that are driving their situation in ways that Clackamas did not. I am open to suggestions. It sounds like our hands are pretty tight here. We've got 2 choices. We can accept the provisional status, get both these counties funded for the first year, or we can send it back to the grant review committee with our recommendations, but no guarantee that they're going to change anything, and it could come right back to us with the same provisional recommendation a month from. Well, what is the timing? How long before it would come back in front of the commission?
So that is, we are flexible, I'll say it that way. So if Jackson County would like to do that quicker, we could probably accommodate that.
No, I mean, what would be if we sent this back to?
Oh, I'm sorry, I misunderstood the
To
question.
the GRC, what would the timing be before the GRC met? Reevaluated, sent its recommendation back to us? Would it be in time for the December meeting? Do we have a meeting scheduled for December?
We have a meeting scheduled on the 20th.
Yeah,
It's very unlikely that it would be the December meeting, just because scheduling that many people that are that busy would be challenging.
do you think
we
we
could-
could find a January meeting?
I would hope so, but I'm hesitant to come there. We often have challenges getting this many people.
January meeting is the 22nd.
The more likely.
That could be doable.
Okay. All right, well, I just want people to understand the timing.
It's at least a 2-month delay. It could be longer.
Yeah,
Yeah.
we're kicking the can down the road here, which delays,
Any certainty.
right, getting them funding.
Just feels like it just feels like Hobson's choice to me, and I don't like it.
Well, it's unfortunate that we don't have our legislators at the meeting today, because I think this really illustrates the challenge with House Bill 3174.
3064.
3064. All right, other discussion.
You want to, my only other question, do you want to take these separate?
Yeah, I do want to take them.
Take them separate, because we might have different votes.
Yep. Unless
So
there's.
you try something?
Yeah, well,
I don't know that I'll vote for it, but I'll try. I would move to approve the staff recommendation for Clackamas County and actually, I should back up. I'll rewind. I move to approve the recommendation of the Grant Review Committee to provide Clackamas County with 1 year provisional funding on their Justice Reinvestment Formula Grant Program.
I'll second that.
A motion made by Commissioner Bovet, seconded by Commissioner Freeman. Give a roll call on that for provisional status for Clackamas County.
Yes. Commissioner Overseer,
Yes.
Commissioner Beach,
Yes.
Vice Chair Bovet,
Yes.
Commissioner Freeman,
Yes.
Commissioner McPherson,
Yes.
and Chair Solomon.
Yes.
Want me to try the next one?
Yeah.
Again, I'm not promising I'll vote for it, but I would move to approve the Grant Review Committee's recommendation that the Jackson County grant application for Justice Reinvestment funding under the Formula Grant Program be approved.
So you're,
I'm moving to, approve Jackson County, the Grant Review Committee's recommendation for 1 year provisional funding. But I'll let you know, I'm probably going to vote no. Because I heard Kiki and I don't want her to not do the program she wants to do.
well, okay, let's get a vote on this because I'm a little conflicted on this one too. And if we don't approve this, then we would make a recommendation
We just go,
I think we need to be specific though in our recommendation to the GRC.
Sure, and I think that it would be sufficient if this motion were to fail for you all collectively then to provide that feedback on the record.
or I can make another
Or we
motion
can make
to
another
deny it with explanation.
Either way.
Yeah.
Or which, I'm also happy to withdraw the motion because it hasn't been seconded. So what would you like to start with?
Let's go forward with the motion, so we'll just be clear and
See where
we're sticking. Yeah.
Okay. So the motion on the floor is to approve the Grant Review Committee's recommendation that we approve the Jackson County JRI grant at a 1 year provisional level.
All right, so is there a second?
Oh, well, I get that, for that.
Well, if I may, I'm glad there's not a second. I would like to discuss in more detail what sort of recommendations we would be giving the GRC if we were to send it back. That will inform my vote.
Okay, so let's back up. We don't have the second.
Let me try another. You want me to try another? Oh, no, go
Well,
on.
let's have the discussion, I think, first of what direction might look like to the group review committee.
So personally, I guess I'll just keep talking. I would like to see the Grant Review Committee look at the specifics within Jackson County related to crime rates within the last 2 years, particularly those related to drug and property crimes, and the interaction of those two together. As a starting point, and they already address law enforcement staffing. But that's what I'd really like them to look at. I'd like to look at what their diversion rates are really about. And anyways, that's my thoughts. It's not articulated well. There it is.
And sure, if I may
Yeah.
add to that, I think Kiki was very clear that if she were to receive training, that this program would not go into effect. 4 months is not enough time to recruit and do backgrounds and hire, let alone get a program started to then submit another application.
Yeah.
So I think that's something that really needs to be considered by the grant review committee as well.
Just looking at the comments from provisional.
Well, and quite frankly, just listening to this meeting, I think would be very informative.
Actually, that's a good point.
That is a great point. And I also think that as much as we can direct them what we think they should do, ultimately, they're the ones that make the decisions. So if they have specific questions like they've articulated in the provisional request, maybe they can just ask those questions, get them answered, and then maybe that gets them to a full year, quickly, but maybe that gets the answers that the review committee needs anyway.
Yeah, you feel clear enough about what the commission is asking at this point? In terms of direction to the GRC?
We are taking notes on what has been said so far. Could we maybe restate just to make sure that we have what you have? So you would like the grant review committee to look at drug and property crime rates and their interaction in Jackson County and look at what diversion rates are really about. And then take a look, and I guess we would, as CGC staff, would provide context to the grant review committee that Jackson County is only moving forward with this new program based on the provisional decision, whether or not it's full funding or not. And then encourage the grant review committee to listen to the commission meeting and then ask specific questions of the county again to consider those specific answers.
Yeah, and I don't know, short of them listening to the meeting, which I know grant review committee members are all busy people, if you could encapsulate some of what has been shared, I think at minimum, that might be helpful.
Yeah, specifically, the grant review committee was concerned about the connection to Measure 110, so maybe Jackson County just needs to answer that. That might, that might suffice to.
Yeah.
Would you like them to just answer these things?
Yeah, those things in more detail, certainly in addition to the by Commissioner Bowen.
Okay.
Would be fine.
And the issue raised earlier, with 1 year funding, can you do what you're even planning to do? The pragmatics.
Oh, I get it.
I think the grant review committee should think about the pragmatics.
Sure.
We're giving 1 year of funding accomplish anything.
So just to restate, so I'm hearing two things. We're gonna ask Jackson County to maybe re-articulate some of the answers that they've provided and add some additional answers to these 4 items in a document that the GRC will then review, and the GRC will then consider all the things that I stated just a moment ago.
Correct. And
I'm sorry, while we're at it, I'll add to my wish list.
Sure.
For Jackson County, more case-specific data about how the lack of jail space has led to people being arrested repeatedly and then becoming a much stronger case for a prison sentence. That rings true to me, but I think it would benefit us to see actual case-specific evidence that is in fact happening. And in that same spirit, I do understand we all have, many of us, I won't say we all, but some of us at least have a feeling that Measure 110 is contributing to a spike in property crimes, but I would like to see some evidence-based data to support that, if such a thing is even, if we're even at a time in history where we're able to gather that.
So we will certainly do our best. We'll work with Jackson County on this. I don't know how, with holidays and everything else, how quickly Jackson County could pull this stuff together and we could pull this together and collaborate, but yes, we will certainly do it.
but since we have Kiki on the line still, maybe we can just get her 2 cents on being able to respond to the requests that are being authored here potentially today.
Sure, thank you, Chair Solomon. Again, we have done the deep dive, and the majority of the information that's being requested was provided in that report that the commission hopefully received last week from Jackson County. So I also want to just clarify, we indicated ballot measure 110 because that was, again, a follow-up question asking us to continue to explain the reason that we've seen this increase in prison use. We also identified in our original grant application several other reasons associated with that, including several of the social determinants of health that we've identified locally. So collectively, our answer with the original grant application information and the follow-up questions created us the opportunity to say we have a lot of things contributing to our property crimes, but we've mostly seen an increase since 2021 in that property crime rate. And again, that was data that we had provided. Hopefully the commission was able to receive that report. So as we make those statements, I want folks to know that collectively between the original grant application, those follow-up questions, those questions that you're talking about today, we've answered those questions, and that information has been provided. We are very happy to provide additional information as we move forward and welcome, further input. I think it's just, again, important that we have diverted over 400,000 bed days because Justice Reinvestment Program is working in Jackson County. And so I just would like to leave with that. And I would like to, if I have an opportunity, just to real quickly say, is our preference 1 year provisional funding, or do we want to wait to see if we can go back before the grant review committee? 1 year provisional funding, I can tell you we wouldn't be able to go forward if we don't get the opportunity to apply again until April or May and not get that funding available, and that would be an unknown. If we have the opportunity to go back before the grant review committee, answer the questions, and get that information by January, that gives us really 2 years then that we can implement such program, because that funding lasts until December 31st of 25. So thank you. I hope that answered your question.
Yes, that's helpful.
Mr. Chair, my guess is the grant review committee has not seen the response that was sent to us.
Came after.
That is correct.
Came after.
Okay, so
Yeah,
then
that's right.
maybe there's already answered the question.
Yeah. Okay, so we had a motion that failed.
Let me try
Put them
again.
on provisional status. It feels like we're leaning toward direction to the GRC to send this back with our comments. So at this time, I entertain a motion to that effect.
So I would then, and as oddly as it sounds, based on my last motion, I would move to reject the recommendation of the grant review committee related to the Jackson County application for Formula JRI grant funding, and ask them to reconsider that grant application in light of the answers that Jackson County has provided to this commission subsequent to the GRC's review, as well as any other additional questions that the GRC might have, taking into light the discussion that we've had here today.
And I'll second.
Good.
So we have a motion.
Yeah.
We have a motion by Commissioner Bovet, second by Commissioner Beach. Director Sandgren.
Certainly. Commissioner Alex here,
Yes.
Commissioner Beach,
Yes.
Vice Chair Bovet,
Yes.
Commissioner Freeman,
Yes.
Commissioner McPherson,
Yes.
and Chair Solomon.
Yes. Okay, thank you for working through that. Next up is do we still need to do the competitive? Right?
And unallocated
Yeah.
and victim services.
Great. We've got some work ahead of us. So just want to do a time check here, commissioners. This meeting was originally scheduled till 2. We had a little bit of a late start. This discussion has taken longer. I hope folks are okay with staying a little longer. We'll try and move through the rest of this a little quicker, but I anticipate we've probably got at least a half hour to go through the rest of the agenda. If that works for everybody.
We can cut the last.
All right, well, let's, okay.
Without major.
Okay, great. All right.
Okay. So I'll move as quickly as possible. Please do interrupt me or us as we go through this. So first up is unallocated funding. So because Oregon has 36 counties and there is a formula grant, however, only 33 counties did apply, there is some unallocated formula grant funding. And so the commission has a few ways to address unallocated funds. The grant review committee saw those funds and made some suggestions on how to allocate that funding, which I'll articulate now. So what I'm talking about is program funding. So that's 784,000 does not touch the victim service. So victim service would be a different thing to handle, but, so the grant review committee is suggesting that the commission apply the unallocated funds in 3 ways. The first is to award up to $50,000 to Lake County to assist the county in improving engagement with historic and underserved communities. Likewise with Malheur County, the same recommendation for the same amount of money. They saw in both Lake and Malheur County's applications some opportunities for improvement. And so they'd like to provide resources to both Lake and Malheur County to be able to engage with those underserved communities. The final recommendation is the remainder of that fund, so approximately $184,000 and they want to put that money into the competitive grant pot, for lack of a better term, to then be allocated. As you'll see in a few minutes, the grant review committee actually has two recommendations, a primary recommendation and a contingent recommendation. Their primary recommendation is with the hope that you are allocating the $684,000 into the competitive.
Okay, before we get too far into this, I want to make a couple of comments. I think we need to be clear that the GRC is asking us to take unallocated money from the formula and put it into the competitive. And it's not a whole lot of money. But an argument could be made that that money should stay with the formula. That would require us to create a competitive process and disregard the recommendations that they've made. I also recognize that in the competitive that we have more counties applying, that there isn't enough money to fully fund those downward departure programs that have applied. But I do have some heartburn around just taking the formula money and setting a precedence here that any money that we have left over from formula goes to competitive. I think we should at least do that with our eyes open and be really clear about that's the decision, that's our priority today. So I just wanted to kind of throw that out there as we consider this recommendation.
And Chair, if I may.
Yeah.
Oh, go ahead.
Well, I was just going to interject with one quick thing, Chair, to find your comments, Chair. This is something that, unlike the consideration that the commission just had about the GRC recommendations related to formula funding, you all do have control over this money, right? So by rejecting the GRC recommendation, that doesn't mean anything goes back to the decision that you all could make today. You don't even have to make today. Is since we have unallocated funding, you could choose to direct it to an existing grant award program, which could actually be a formula program today. You could, of your own volition, say, this county's program is really good, we'd like to give them more money. Or you could allocate it to the competitive grant process as suggested by the GRC, or you could choose to do nothing and consider later. Or you could do a competitive grant process, which we as staff would want direction. So we have a couple of different options, but I wanted to make sure that there was just clarity following the discussion we just had related to the changes made in 3064, that this is a decision that you all have a lot more flexibility within our rules.
Where did this particular proposal stem from?
The grant review committee, actually, staff did not.
They
suggest-
came up with
They
it
came up.
themselves.
Yes.
And do you know why they want us to move $684,000 from formula to competitive? What was their idea?
Yeah, I'm forgetting the exact number, but the funding deficit for total asks and for competitive and available funding is in excess of 4 million. And so
Yes.
they were hoping to just, I think, partially close that gap.
Yeah.
If I may, Chair.
Yeah.
So I would just, my personal opinion, I would prefer to keep this with the formula grant. And I'm thinking, yes, competitive grant supports our prison diversion, but there is a lot of other programming involved in prison diversion.
Yep.
Short-term releases from prison, housing, getting those folks out on the back end, various other programs based under community corrections that I think those formula funds could be used for. I can envision a ton of things we could apply for, certainly.
And I would just agree with what was just said. On the other hand, and I don't know that I've made it my mind here, but on the other hand, really, JRI competitive is, say this, it's the most diversion from prison we have. It's our most powerful tool. It's discretionary for that reason, because you have to have a law enforcement community, and especially the DA, wrapped around giving people downward departures to a significant degree and taking them out of the prison system. So it's a big ask. When I was DA, I used it all the time. And so I like putting another $1 million or close to $1 million in JRI competitive, but I want 10 more for that. And so, but then I also hear what you're saying about the competitive part or the formula part. I mean, we don't have enough for formula right now.
Right.
So it's,
Yeah, I really struggled with this one too. I appreciate, the grant review committee's recommendation in the spirit under which it was taken. At the same time, when I look at the decrease in grant and aid funding and how counties are really reliant more on the formula funds to cover those services that are really designed to reduce, prison utilization and recidivism. And that this money is coming from formula. I feel more inclined to leave it there, but understand that there are really good arguments to put it into competitive. Other thoughts from commissioners?
Chair Solomon, my question would really be, can we allow the staff to go through where the $684,000 would go if it was to go in a competitive grant?
Sure.
Because I think that would be helpful to know what impact we think that would make in a competitive grant situation.
I'm happy to do that.
Yeah. Okay, great. Yeah.
and that's the next agenda.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay.
So, I'll just note that happy to present this. However, from like an order of operations standpoint, the decision around unallocated funding needs to go before competitive.
Just from purely procedures.
Yeah. So, as many of you know, the competitive grant is complementary to the formula grant, though it's different. So to use perhaps a tortured analogy, they're like colored pencils. The Justice Reinvestment Program pays for a whole host of different things. The formula grant pays for pretrial, downward departure, treatment, housing, general supervision, peer mentors. They're, the whole color of the rainbow. The competitive grant, by contrast, is only just one of those colored pencils. It is a downward departure targeted program. And so it is different, it acts different, the mechanism by which funding is made is different. So it is specifically targeted to downward departure prison diversion programs, and it is not fixed by formula, it is competitive. And so the funds awarded must be used to support key personnel that increase local capacity to engage in downward departure prison diversion programs. And also it can go to support training directly related to the development or operation of a downward departure program. So it's not only just downward departure, but it's of the key personnel and training of a downward departure program. So it's very narrowly focused. So here are the asks. This biennium, we received 15 applications. The total ask was 11.7 million. However, there's only $7.2 million in program funding available. So $4.4 million of asks will not be funded, no matter how you slice and dice it. There just is not enough money for the asks. In the grant application, we have this language, and then we have, I'll read the language, but I'll note that we then in the application have specific questions around different services and sanctions. So the application says the competitive grant may not be used to support wraparound services or sanctions for program participants such as treatment, housing, or peer mentors. Applicants are strongly encouraged to use the formula grant Justice Reinvestment Program funding to build appropriate local service and sanction capacity. And then there's questions specific around, do you have capacity to do substance use treatment, housing, peer mentor, mental health treatment, and local sanctions. So the grant review committee, they were faced with a $4 million funding deficit. And so we as staff made some base funding recommendations that they adopted. There are three pieces to that. The first is to only fund personnel and associated training and travel. So what this functionally means was we were not going to pay for any equipment, any supplies, administrative costs, bar dues, those kinds of things. And then we would also only fund training and associated travel requests that are tied to the individual personnel that would be funded through the competitive grant. So the training, and I'll just state this up front. Many of the requests, I think the vast majority of these requests were excellent requests. However, the grant review committee had to make tough decisions. And so they chose to only fund training and associated travel requests for the positions funded or proposed to be funded out of the competitive grant. And then for any new positions, some counties requested 24 months. The grant review committee chose to recommend funding them for only 18 months, recognizing that it often takes 4 to 6 months to hire a new position. So once they made those base funding decisions to try and close that funding deficit, they still had a significant funding deficit to close. And so they then considered what personnel requests count as key personnel. So we as staff, we put together this framework that we presented to the grant review committee, which they then used to make determinations around key personnel. They had the opportunity to change things, make decisions contrary to this framework or scaffolding that we proposed, but they ultimately used this framework to make their decisions. So I won't go through each of these items, but I'll just note that we grouped personnel requests in different buckets. And what you see here on the right is either a target or a cross-section of the earth, however you want to think of it. The key decision here is how core is a personnel request to a downward departure prison diversion program. And so you can't do it without a PL and a deputy district attorney, for example. So they're the most core. And then from out there, perhaps they're less core. And so the grant review committee used this scaffolding as a decision-making matrix. So their recommendation to you is to adopt the recommendations, what we're going to call the base recommendations in yellow, which I outlined earlier. And then they have two recommendations. The first is the primary recommendation, which is if you choose to allocate the $680,000 to competitive, they would like to fund the core, contributing and supporting personnel. And then they would like to allocate $173,000 to Washington County to cover part of the cost of their third PO request and associated training costs for that third PO. Now, if you choose not to allocate the $680,000 to competitive, they have a contingent recommendation where you would fund only core, contributing, and supervisory personnel. So instead of supporting, it would be supervisory. That's the key distinction there. And then you would only fund 2 probation officers for Washington County, and then there would be a 2% reduction to every urban county and their award, total award. So that would be a reduction off the top.
And can you tell us in the aggregate what that 2% is?
Like dollar amount?
Yeah.
So I think of the 15 counties, 8 of them were urban. Most of those requests were larger requests. I don't know if you give us a moment, I can get you an exact dollar.
Yeah.
figure.
I'm looking at it right now.
Meanwhile, we can keep going.
Well, actually, this is the final recommendation there for competitor. So happy to answer questions.
Okay, so if I understand correctly, we need to go back and make a decision before we get to making a decision about the competitive. We have to deal with the unallocated first.
Correct.
Right. Carl, you were asking a question. Did your question get answered? Because I thought you were asking more about the competitive, what a process might look like for the 680,000. Or were you talking about this?
We're talking about this.
Okay.
Where's the 680,000 would go?
Yeah.
Actually.
Yeah, so if we could back up now and talk about the what a separate competitive process might look like for the formula if we were to leave it in formula. It sounds like we also have the option, we could just say, give it all to Yamhill County if we wanted, right?
So am I to understand the competitive thing you just talked about already has this money in it? That we're talking about now?
They already have the 7.2 million, however, they don't have the additional 680.
Okay, so that has not been.
Correct.
the recommendation, okay.
And if I could, just from a process standpoint, Ian, could you go back to the slide that has the options?
Yes.
I got the wrong direction there. If the commission would like to adopt the contingent recommendation, which is the one that does not include any of the leftover funds in the formula, you could do so and completely table the decision about additional funds until later. So you could move forward with a motion right now on the contingent recommendation. However, if you want to adopt the primary recommendation, then we would have to have two votes, one to actually allocate the money
Yeah.
first, and then to actually adopt the GRC recommendation, just to be crystal clear. But part of that is just as a reminder that we could hear from Ian to describe the process we would use for competitive solicitation. But again, we could table that decision till later if you did not feel like you were ready to make that decision today. Or you could also come back, for example, in December, and just as Chair said, you could vote to give it to a formula county directly without the need for an application or any number of counties. I mean, you could actually split it 31 ways and just boost everybody. I'm just saying.
It's not that much money.
There are options, but then also we do not have to necessarily follow one path.
Got it. I guess, I worry a little bit about kicking this too far down the road because then it's just that much longer before you get the competitive process together, counties apply and the money actually flows. And I think if we could give some direction today, that might be, more timely.
So do I understand this right? If we put in the formula, it sort of spreads it out amongst everybody.
Well, we don't have to spread it out. I think what we were thinking is doing a competitive process because it's not a ton of money. And that way, you know, we could evaluate the submissions and give it to 4 or 5 counties.
I see. Okay. But we could put it in the formula. if We wanted to.
We could.
And then it would,
Then
each of the counties would get a little bit and they could use it for the variety of different
Mhm.
programs.
Mhm.
Whereas if we leave it in the competitive, it is specific to the one pencil analogy.
Right.
Okay.
But one question, staff, if I could. In staff's opinion, where do we get the maximum bang for our buck of $684,000? I know that's putting you on the hot seat here.
Yeah.
But that's my bottom line question. How do we get the most out of that money?
Yeah, instead of answering the question directly. Let me present some contextual information that may help you answer that question. So the key difference between the primary and the contingent recommendation is whether or not you want to allocate funding to supervisory, this third bullet point here, which would fund pro-implementation supervisors, program managers, and program supervisors. So people that manage POs, or to allocate the funding to supporting, so client support specialists, administrative and analysts, which is really a euphemism for a housing connector or a corrections deputy and escort, which for that particular county would allow them to transport adults in custody in jail to connect them with treatment, pretrial, or their defensive trainees. And
So
That's an excellent answer, but I wanted to check both.
yeah, and I guess the
Yeah.
question I was asked, would have asked, and I don't know if this was Commissioner Bovet's intent, is if we don't put it in the competitive
Mhm.
and we set up a separate process, where do we get the best bang for our buck?
completely separate from competitive.
Yeah,
It would probably be a downward departure program.
well, that's what this is.
Yeah, so it could be, you could buy slightly more time of a PO or slightly more time.
And that's what the CRC recommends, basically.
Right, and this brings back to kind of where we started, which is I struggle with just wholesale moving the savings from formula into competitive. I know there's a need there. There's also a need in formula, and that's where these savings came from. So I think that's the decision we need to make first. And I would love to get some,
Well, and Chair, if I may,
Yep.
again, I just want to specify, Community Corrections is fully supporting short-term transitional. If we cannot fund that, and we depend a lot on the formula grant funds for that, then we lose that component. And I would be curious to see the data to look at prison diversion programs versus STTL, because I think we would be astounded
Yeah.
with the amount of money we have saved in prison diversion through. And if a county doesn't have housing, they can't do it.
and to the presentation that we gave earlier, we're investing JRI and grant and aid dollars in programs that are significantly reducing recidivism. So I think there's an argument to be made that we get pretty good bang for the buck. And I'm very sensitive to what all of the counties are dealing with right now and the loss of grant and aid funds. So if I could, I think it'd be great if we could get some direction from the commissioners right now about the direction we want to go. If we want to just leave it in competitive, that's easy. If we want to move it to formula, then we can talk about what the methodology is for distributing it. So if I could, maybe commissioners could weigh in about which way they think is the best to go. That would be helpful.
I think my opinion's clear.
Yeah.
I would prefer to keep it in formula and allow all the counties the option to augment and continue their transition services, which is also a huge portion of prison diversion.
I guess for what it's worth, I'm in the same place. Although I'm pretty perturbed about not having it.
Yeah.
I agree with that.
I'm conflicted. I think I would be a slight lean to the GRC's recommendation,
Mhm.
but slightly.
I would lean towards GRC's recommendation.
Right, so it seems like we've got a split here, maybe more towards formula.
Where are you at?
Yeah, I'm more inclined to, put it in formula too. And I get the value of the, downward departure programs. I think we're facing, particularly with specialty courts and the downward departure programs, we're a victim of our own success right now. And I think there's a message here to the legislature that we have been funding these programs on a thin dime for a very long time. And now we've really encouraged other counties to apply, and they are, which is great, but that just thins the soup. And at some point, this doesn't become sustainable. If we had another 10 counties applying for competitive, given the amount of money that's allocated, I don't know how effective we would be. So I think that's kind of the larger issue that we have to deal with. The formula funding is a little more set. And given kind of the situation in the counties today, and given how effective they've been in using formula dollars, many counties, I feel like at this moment, that's probably the best use of these dollars. So that's where I stand. Okay. I'm hearing 2 votes for competitive and 4 votes for formula. Do we need to formalize that? Can you?
We will need a vote. One thing I want to just be clear on is I think that even on this slide, the use of the word competitive is kind of confusing things
It is.
together. The 2 options, I think, right now, that it sounds like you all are considering is we either need to decide whether to do a competitive grant process for the extra money. And then you all can specify whether that competitive grant process should be open to all,
Mhm.
or could be somehow tied into the downward departure. Or you can do a direct award to existing grant programs, again, open to all, or focused on the downward departure. So I just want to make sure that we word those correctly. It sounds like everybody is actually, maybe not everybody, it sounds like the majority right now is leaning towards having a supplemental, thank you, Ian.
Yeah.
A supplemental grant process.
Yeah, that's right.
Open to all.
Mhm.
That's my reading at the moment.
Yeah.
So I just want to make sure that whoever phrases the motion,
Yeah.
we just say it correctly within our administrative rules.
Yeah, so, given what I've heard, I think it would be helpful to get a motion to deny the GRC's recommendation on supplemental funding or on the additional use of the formula funds and to create a supplemental grant process for the counties to apply for the remaining $784,000.
Who will make that motion?
I'll second.
Okay, so we have a motion by Commissioner Freeman, seconded by Commissioner Beach. Do we need additional direction around supplemental process at this point? Or will this recommendation suffice and then we can just talk a little bit more about?
I don't think it has to be expressed in the motion. So staff is here to hear your preferences, but I think that after the motion, either, I mean, if the motion should pass, then anything you would like them to consider while they build the supplemental process would be very beneficial.
Okay.
Roll call. Commissioner Auxier? No. Commissioner Beach?
Yes.
Vice Chair Bovet?
Yeah.
Commissioner Freeman?
Yes.
Commissioner McPherson?
No.
And Chair Salomon?
Yes.
It does pass.
And I just want to say that I've been on a lot of commissions and boards where it's universal decisions. And I actually think it's healthy that we don't have universal votes all the time and that we can have healthy discussions about how we manage the resources of the Community Criminal Justice Commission. So thank you all for your thoughtful comments. Okay, so let's talk a little bit more about process.
So I think so far what we've heard as staff is that it needs to be open to all.
Yep.
But I'm not sure if there are any guardrails, focus areas, anything like that that you all would like to provide to us as we build that program.
So one thing I would mention is that comparatively it's a relatively small amount of money. So whatever process we put in place, I would make it sort of in addition to what everybody's already done, not a whole new process.
Yeah.
You know, maybe go back and say, you know, the funding you provided would do these things, but not these. We'd like to fund this within their original application. So not reinvent the wheel.
Yeah, and so you've done supplemental rounds in the past when there's been excess money. Is there any reason why we couldn't more or less replicate the process? I mean, would that be easier for you as staff?
I think more guidance would be helpful. So
Around dollar amounts, when
Yeah.
you've done supplementals in the past, have you set floors and ceilings around the dollar amounts? Because it seems like that might be one place to start.
we have done both.
Mhm.
So last biennium, it was akin to an opt-in. So if you go down this route, you get 35,000. If you go down this route, you get 50,000. In past biennia, it has been asked for what you need. And some of those asks have been quite large. Others have been, literally just what they need. And some have tried to stand up new programs. Others have tried to just supplement what they're going on. Or in one case, the county said, hey, we'd like to expand this program next biennium. So we're going to bring on an extra person and fund it for 6 months to then go into the next biennium. So
Is there any logic to just adding the percentage on what they've already been awarded? It seems like the award has already been done.
I mean, we could do that. I think it just thins the soup I mean, it's not that much money.
Right.
And, you know, I think that's certainly an option. I think I would probably lean toward, let's set some thresholds so that we can do a little, get more bang for the buck in a handful of counties. And, you know, would be also mindful of geographic distribution. You know, I think it's easy for the big counties to come up with really competitive grant applications, but if we kind of say, these are a handful of things that we want to fund, here's the funding range, $35,000 to $50,000 or something like that. It would be enough amount of money that it would be more meaningful than a $2,000 or an $8,000 supplement for a county, depending on their size.
Doesn't make a lot of sense. It's just some of the small counties that have done all this work, maybe have even hired a contractor to help them get the application together, may not be in a position to apply again. That's what I was thinking. But you're right, and maybe those counties, just the amount they would get anyway wouldn't be.
Yeah, so with the supplemental in the past, the application process has been pretty simple, hasn't it?
Yeah, not counting like put your name on the paper. Typically it's 2, maybe 3 questions.
All right, thoughts? Well, I can make a recommendation. I mean, I think, that making the process simple enough that any of the counties could apply and, maybe setting a floor at $25,000 and a ceiling at 50,000 would allow us to make a significant number of grants. And in terms of priorities, have you set them in the past with supplemental where you said these are the things that we want to consider, and if so, what were they?
Last year, it was a focus on working with historically underserved communities. And so many counties hired a consultant to walk them through or work with their LIPSIC to develop what some called an equity action plan, others called just, a community engagement plan. One of the counties stood up a brand new program focused on working with historically underserved communities. So that was last May. In past years, it has been more open-ended.
Yeah, I would lean toward maybe more open-ended because we've taken such cuts to programs. I think that it would be easy for most counties to say, well, we already lost this really critical component. If we could add that back, that would be a great value. So maybe making it a little more open-ended and with the focus to be on restoration.
Specifically community corrections or?
Well, that's who's applying for the funds is counties.
Yeah, not all counties have community corrections,
Yeah.
That's true.
so.
And I'll also note here that historically we've done about 12, sometimes 13 applications. And so the ceiling was to be 50,000. There would actually be $100,000 of leftover.
Okay, so
There could be more applicants this year. I'm just,
let's set the ceiling at 75. And then you'll have the decision if there are too many.
the grant review committee
Or
will.
grant review. I'm shaving them down.
I like the idea of having the restoration, but also broad enough, even if it's not community corrections, if there's some other program that was successful,
Yeah,
you can articulate, I like that.
I mean,
How do you all feel about personnel? Do you want to exclude personnel, keep personnel?
I would say absolutely include
I
personnel.
was gonna say, that's what I'm doing the work.
Work cutting bodies
Yeah.
and community corrections, technical programs.
Are there any things you would like to exclude? Like not even have them considered or direct them?
I guess I'm less interested in seeing the grant application for equipment, for computers.
Sure.
And I know people need computers and equipment, but I'm less interested in seeing that.
Yeah. Do you feel similarly about supplies? I know it's a somewhat abstract difference.
It's, again, it's tough because we're talking about small dollars, so I wouldn't want to preclude it.
Okay.
But, you know, what's been said here is spot on correct. I mean, grant and aid funding isn't cutting it. Suffering.
Yeah, restoration isn't buying computers or paper. It's
Yeah, it's
hiring back
I
programs.
don't think it shouldn't be hard for counties to figure out kind of
Yeah.
like, do you have housing needs that you had to cut from your budget? Do you have, you know, part of a position that you've lost that is really critical to a program? Those are the things that I think would be really beneficial.
I agree.
Okay, so
I think I have
feel
what
like
it-
I'm in that
yes.
direction?
Mhm.
Okay. Great, thank you for allowing me to muddle us through this process. All right, so we've made a decision about the excess formula. Now we can move forward to
Competitive.
competitive recommendations and approving those
Yes.
as recommended. Were there any other slides?
No.
Okay.
So at this point, you have the contingent recommendation available to you, so you could either choose to accept that recommendation or send it back to the grant review committee.
Is there someone that'd like to make a motion to accept the contingent, recommendation from the grant review committee?
I would make that motion.
Is there a
I'll
second?
second.
Okay, Commissioner Freeman's motion, seconded by Commissioner Beach. Roll call, please.
I'm sorry, that was by Freeman, second by Beach.
Yeah.
Commissioner Uxer,
Yes.
Commissioner Beach,
Yes.
Vice Chair Bovet,
Yes.
Commissioner Freeman,
Yes.
Commissioner McPherson,
Yes.
and Chair Solomon.
Yes. Okay, are we now to the 3%?
That's
Victim
For
services.
victim services, okay. Why?
We're gonna do a quick shuffle because the computer's dying.
I realize I do not know the answer to this question. Are Douglas and Lynn
Mhm.
counties that are, their community corrections department run by the state,
Mhm.
they apply for and receive formula funding?
They do, I have to look at their
Okay.
budgets to figure out if they even, so I know for Douglas and that competitive, they do not ask for a PO, and Commissioner Freeman, please correct me, and I don't believe they pay for a PO in the formula either.
Okay, just curious.
All right, so let's talk about some victims services funding. So as you all know, thanks to Senate Bill 1510, 10% of the JRP funds that are allocated to the counties then get given to community-based services organizations that provide services directly to crime victims, excuse me. So similar to your GRC, we had a victim services advisory panel that you can see the 9 members are listed here. Just kind of a side note, prior to me joining the CJC in June of this year, I spent about 10 years working in the social work field. And I just want to point out, I have a really impressive panel here. These are like movers and shakers throughout the state, and they do some really, really awesome work. So it was really an honor to lead this panel and to see their recommendations. And the questions that they asked and that you all will ask yourselves when they were evaluating these applications were, are these funds going to positively impact victim services? So do they demonstrate community need for services provided? And are they putting an emphasis on serving your marginalized and your underserved populations? And this one will come up quite a bit in a little bit, but are they offering direct services that allow their participants to overcome barriers? Are they increasing the capacity for areas where services are difficult to access, services are limited, or in some of our frontier counties, pretty much non-existent? Are they demonstrating trauma-informed services? And then finally, are they collecting demographic data for the persons that they served? So these graphs kind of break down the types of providers in both the formula and the competitive grant. So up in that top right-hand corner, you have your CACs or your Child's Advocacy Centers. Chair Solomon kind of brought these up briefly earlier. These are going to be agencies that serve specifically children and then the families of those children who have experienced abuse or neglect. Then that big chunk, that orange, is going to be agencies that serve survivors of domestic violence and sexual assault. That gray slice is going to be agencies that serve survivors of human trafficking. Your yellow slice is going to be your CASAs or your court-appointed special advocates. So these are advocates that are serving children that have gone through the court system and are involved in the courts and DHS in some way. And then finally, that light blue is going to be other, and these are primarily agencies that are providing usually legal resources or some other direct services to survivors of a wide variety of crimes. So for instance, many of the legal resources might say help someone who's experienced domestic violence gain custody of their children, something like that. One thing I do want to note about this is these boxes, as the applicants are checking them, are kind of limited. So for instance, an agency that primarily serves survivors of domestic violence and sexual assault might also serve survivors of human trafficking, but they aren't, right? They're going to go with the majority of the services that they provide. So these are the counties whose organizations the Victim Services Panel recommended full funding. So a couple notes about this list. You'll see some asterisks or some cute little stars. Those are counties that had both formula and competitive funding, or organizations for both the formula and competitive round. And then also I do want to draw your attention to Deschutes County. They have 4 agencies listed out. They actually had 5 apply, but it was only recommended full funding for 4 of the 5. So that's why they're listed out. And we'll get to that 5th one in just a minute. All right, and so now we're going to talk about the agencies that the Victim Services Panel recommended not funding. So I think that just for the sake of time, what I'll do is I'll go through each one. But if you have any questions or concerns or want to know more, please by all means wave me down and stop me. So the first one in Deschutes County was In Our Backyard. This is an agency that provides predominantly prevention services to help stop human trafficking. So instead of doing as many direct services to people who had survived human trafficking, they're doing some really awesome work with prevention. So lots of classes for youth, specifically focused on K through 12th graders, and they included some pop-up life skills classes where they're teaching teens basic life skills in hopes of trafficking prevention. So while I do want to note that the Victim Services Panel really appreciated that this is a really important program and a really interesting program, they really wanted funding to be focused on those agencies that were providing direct services to survivors.
Quick question. If the recommendation is not to fund them, would the county retain that funding to be used for other programs that are more appropriate?
Exactly. And so the counties would work with staff at the CJC. In all honesty, a couple of the counties we've already connected with, and they already have alternative organizations in mind. So for Wallowa County, they recommended no funding for Wallowa Valley Center for Wellness. This is an agency that provides behavioral health services and developmental disabilities services in Wallowa County. And their application was pretty sparse, and they were not clear that they provide services to victims of crime. So statistically speaking, right, any agency that's listed, right, they are in some way going to most likely be serving victims of crime in some way, but not specific to victims of crime. Does that make sense? So they're not specifically for domestic violence, sexual assault, human trafficking, or any of those that we've listed earlier. So again, this one, the Victim Services Panel recommended finding another agency. They actually specifically recommended that there is a CAC, so that's Children's Advocacy Center. There's both a CAC and a Domestic Violence and Sexual Assault Services Organization in Wallowa County. And they thought that either or both of those would be a better fit for this funding. And then similarly, there were two agencies in Wasco County. The first is YES, or the Youth Empowerment Shelter. This is the youth shelter for the Columbia Gorge. So they, again, their primary service is to youth who are homeless, not to, say, youth who have experienced crime. So it wasn't listed in their primary mission. I really want to give credit to the panel because they went above and beyond the applications and researched into their website as well and did a lot of digging. And it just wasn't found that the Youth Empowerment Shelter was providing those direct services or had training in directly serving victims of crime. And then similar, there was Give Them Wings Incorporated. This is a peer-based women's recovery housing program that's serving. They did note that they serve female victims of crime, but again, their primary focus is homelessness. And they, again, didn't really articulate any training or background or any specific services that they provide, say, for survivors of domestic violence or sexual assault. So I do want to note specifically with this one, with the Give Them Wings Incorporated, the panel really hoped that potentially going forward, they might be a good applicant for JRI funding directly, not for this victims 10%. So those are those four. And I'll hand it back to Chair Solomon.
Great. Any questions? Yeah.
With regards to any of those victim agencies, any of them been previously funded by JRI in the past?
No, so none of these four particular ones have been. I will note that the Wallowa Center for Wellness had applied previously and was not recommended for funding then.
And that was my other piece. Were these various agencies given feedback with regard to if they could provide you with examples of victim direct services that they could use those funds that way?
No, they were not given that opportunity.
But I'm assuming the application itself is pretty clear about what application funds are supposed to be.
It is very clear. I will say too that the victim services panel really, we talked a lot about how we could improve the application process going forward, because it was really clear that a few of the agencies that applied missed that somehow, and we don't want to waste anyone's time. And so I think there was a lot of discussion about how going forward we can improve the application process and make it much clearer.
And then I did have one last question. And I think you did touch on this, but just confirming that each of these counties would have other victim services organizations.
Yes.
These funds.
Yeah.
I just speak on behalf of Yamhill. We have two.
Yeah.
And if both were denied, that would be really unfortunate.
Right.
Luckily, we have a good record with our folks in the direct victim service.
Yeah, absolutely. No, we did go through and make sure that all of them did. Like, for instance, for Deschutes County, right, they had 4 other ones apply, but all of them do have other agencies.
I'm just thinking about urban counties that, may not even have one option.
Right.
So, okay, great. Thank you.
Great. Any other questions? Great. So we have a recommendation from the grant review committee to approve funding for, can you go back to the slide that has the counties listed, with the exception of those programs that we just discussed for the formula 10% and any from the competitive grant. Unless there's further questions for staff or discussion, I would entertain a motion to approve the recommendation.
So moved.
Or perhaps minus the counties.
Minus the programs listed. Do you want us to name those? Ken?
Do we need to do that since this money's just passing through to organizations? No conflicts here.
Well, I think it's up to you all as commissioners. I think in the past, commissioners have
Okay.
abstained, but also.
This one seems like it's going.
That's right.
That's fine too. Yep.
Yeah. Okay, can we back up or go forward to the slide? That has, okay, so, would you be willing to amend your motion to approve funding for all counties, with the exclusion of these programs?
Do we need to name the specific programs?
I think that technically, if you just made a motion to approve the advisory committee recommendations, then that would encapsulate all of these things.
I'll make a motion to go ahead and approve the 2023 Victim Services recommendations of the grant review committee for justice reinvestment.
There's a second.
I'll second that.
Motion by Commissioner Beach, seconded by Commissioner Laxier. Roll call.
Commissioner Rozier,
Yes.
Commissioner Beach,
Yes.
Vice Chair Bovet,
Yes.
Commissioner Freeman,
Yes.
Commissioner McPherson,
Yes.
and Chair Solomon.
Yes. Okay, so now,
I just, it's okay, I know we're on time, but I have a 60-second vote explanation if I could. Would it be okay? And it's nothing that this commission can control, but I've long been frustrated with this part of JRI, but I understand why we did it. As part of 3194 and subsequent things, but I will just say from my perspective as a former district attorney who heavily used JRI and all of its programs to divert a ton of folks out of prison, my biggest struggle was not having enough victim services for the victims of the property crimes that I was diverting. I didn't have victims assistance providers in the DA's office, and we're not funding any DAPs in DA's offices which provide direct services to the victims of the crimes that JRI develops. Anyways, simple frustration, commission can't do anything about it, any service.
all right, I will admit I'm starting to twitch as I hate meetings going over, so I apologize to everybody. I think we've got the 3% that we're gonna do, hopefully, pretty brief on that.
Yeah, great.
Will you navigate slides?
Sure, I can.
Ian's gonna pull up the slides. Got it. Okay. Ian's gonna pull up the slides. I'm gonna talk very quickly. It feels weird to sit over there because I cannot see you all. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay, good.
Yeah.
Okay. Yes, great. All right, I'm gonna move fairly quickly. I know you all have been making some tough decisions on the JRP 3% research projects for this biennium. My name is Kelly Officer. I'm the research director at CJC. Let's go ahead to the next slide. So as many of you know, the JRP rules provide that 3% of the funds are to be used for program evaluations. There are two options that the counties can do. The county can retain the funds. Oh, man. I'm just gonna take it off. This is not working for me. I'm fighting a cold. I totally lost my train of thought. The counties can retain the funds for a locally administered evaluation, or the county can remit the funds back to the CJC for CJC to then administer a program evaluation from there. We have a couple of projects to run by you for today, to get your feedback on these. Some of these estimated budgets are estimates. And so as we get those finalized, we'll come back to you all to kind of get the final results of how that shook out after we do the contracting and all that. So sometimes there's enough left over to do an additional project. Sometimes what we need to do, thank you. Okay. Sometimes there's just a little bit of leftover funds to augment an existing project. So some of these are estimates. And so we'll have to come back to you. This evolves. So our first project with funds that were remitted to the CJC is for the Oregon Crime Victimization Survey. So the first survey was conducted in late 2020. And this was used with the 1921 3% funds at that time. So we actually did a preview of preliminary results to this group a while back. Time really flies. The report is on our website. It was incredibly helpful. It has victimization estimates of Oregonians. So just a quick little tidbit from that report, that showed that 14% of Oregonians reported experience a person crime in the previous year, and 24% reported experiencing a property crime. And there were key groups that experienced higher victimization rates in the state. So Native American and Black individuals reported higher victimization rates, homosexual and bisexual individuals, metro region residents, and younger Oregonians. We're currently working on some follow-up analysis from this. It's very rich data, so we're pretty excited about that. And that will give us a little bit more of a breakdown for some of that metro region information as well. So the project we would like to do is to run this survey again, the second time. And this would be our first opportunity to look at those change over time victimization estimates. Now, a lot of the work has been done here, right? We have the survey methodology, we have the survey instrument already completed. And so we would run the survey again. That does have to go through the state procurement process. We're hopeful that can be a little more streamlined than it was the first time. But we will have to work with our state partners on that. And so we do have a maximum budget here of 410,000. This is the one where, depending on how the state procurement process would work out, this could change. We would like to think it'd be a little less, but we got to wait and see how that works out with the procurement process for this one. So that is the first project. The next project is an evaluation of the Strategic Treatment and Engagement Program, or the STEP court. This is a specialty court in Multnomah County, designed to serve defendants charged with certain violent felonies. This follows the specialty court standards for the program, which includes the therapeutic and interdisciplinary approaches. What's unique about this program is that it focuses on violent felonies, and also it was specifically designed to address disparities in the criminal justice system for non-prison options for eligible defendants. It's a pretty new program. It started just earlier this year in January 2023. So it's really, this would be the time to evaluate a very new and innovative program like this one. We have been in contact with researchers at Portland State University. These were researchers we've worked on previous 3% projects, and they do have the capacity to do this project, which would be pretty involved and lengthy, several different phases here, as you can see. So the first is the process evaluation to look at the characteristics and practices, and then the outcome evaluation for 12 and 24-month recidivism outcomes, cost benefit evaluation, and the implementation manual. Now, the program did just start earlier this year, so it's going to take some time to get to those 12 and 24-month recidivism measures to be able to look at that. And then it's also just a very robust research proposal hill. So it's a multi-year project from 2024 to June of 2027, so a 3.5-year project. This is a little longer time period than some of the projects we've done the last couple biennium, but we could fund the entire project here, and the budget for that would be 485,000 for that one. Okay, next up is Lane County for the retained funds. As you all heard about this project earlier today, the Wayne Home Study. So as a reminder, evaluating the effects of permanent supportive housing in partnership with several organizations in Lane County, Third Sector, Homes for Good, and Lane County Parole and Probation. It's a very robust evaluation that started in September of 2018 and is ongoing. And so as we heard earlier today, the recidivism outcome work is in process. Also, the housing stability, a little harder to measure. And graduate students are involved to work on actually surveying participants involved in the study. And so that gives more of that qualitative information and also provides some more rich information on that housing stability component there. So Lane County has requested to retain their funds for this project, and then also for 100,000 of additional funds from that overall budget, and we have that listed here. And finally, Multnomah County has proposed to retain their funds to evaluate the social work program. The Multnomah County Justice Reinvestment Program has been around since the beginning of justice reinvestment. And one part of that is the social work component within the pretrial phase and the public defense process. And so they specifically want to look at compliance and recidivism outcomes. Also want to do secondary outcomes of success, employment, treatment, and education, and then to do the qualitative interviews of folks who participate in that process as well. So both the analysis with administrative data and the qualitative interviews can be challenging to combine the two, but they have the experience to do that. And the budget there is 219,000. And so that leaves us with a final budget chart here of the 3% funds as shown here. So you can see we are 40,000 short of what is available. But again, once we get the contracting phase going with the victimization survey, it may look a little different, and we'll come back to you all to get that finalized with what that is looking like. And I feel like I was talking very quickly. Feel free to throw questions at me. It's been an in-depth afternoon.
That was a great overview, Kelly. I just want to make a couple of comments. One, historically, this isn't an issue we voted on, so this is more of an informational. But I do want to say that it's great that the money the counties don't use goes back to the CJC for wonderful evaluation projects. It's also bothered me that more counties haven't applied. And, you know, when this was first set up, when House Bill 3194 first passed, I think the requirement was for randomized control trials. And that's a very high bar. They're very expensive. The amount of money that you provide really isn't enough to do. It's an RCT with just the allocation, but you've relaxed those standards. And, you know, I've talked to staff a little bit about this, but I would love to see more counties applying. You know, it doesn't need to be a full-fledged RCT. There are different types of evaluations that can occur. And historically, it's been the Multnomah and Lanes that have consistently applied for these funds. So I just kind of want to get on my soapbox there for a minute about the research dollars. Any questions for Kelly? Right, you can tell it's getting close to the end of the day. This is great information. Thank you.
Thank you.
Kelly. All right, I believe the last two items we are going to defer to the next meeting. Is there any, I know you've got agency updates, is there any brief update that you want to give Ken about anything that we need to know that would be useful prior to the next?
There's nothing we would need to cover before December.
Okay, great. Really appreciate everybody's time today and the hard work to get through these votes. And thank you all for coming down to Lake County. Really appreciate the opportunity to host and look forward to doing a roadshow somewhere else soon.
Yes, thanks to you and Donovan for the tour and the presentation.
Yes, thank you.
We're looking for another session.
Yes.
Well, somebody say. Somebody's March, April.